Yo, yo, yo. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. We're just getting set up here. Go ahead and feel free to file in and get comfortable. Going live on Facebook. Here we are live on YouTube. Rock and roll.
Huh.
Hey,
No,
there we
no.
are.
Now I can hear myself.
It's always a little weird the first 100 times or so. And then you get used to it.
Yeah. I've recorded my voice, but it's different when there's reverb and you're singing and you're mixed into a track. Raw with no reverb, uncut. It's just kind of like, oh man.
I feel you.
Where's my compressor? Where's my de-esser? Where's my... Yeah, who am I kidding? I never used any of those things for voice. Just a little reverb. Well, maybe a compressor. The trick is to get recording quality that you don't have to do much crap to it. And your technicians will thank you. Pro tip for recording. Make sure all your tracks that are coming in are at a good level and sound good to begin with, or at least as best you can. There's this concept of we'll do it in post to make things sound better, and it's like, yeah, you can shine a ball of shit, but it's still a ball of shit. You know what I mean? It's a shiny ball of shit.
Poop in, poop out.
Now you could do the lo-fi approach and have a really crappy audio file coming in, and then clean it up and put it in there, and do those lo-fi beats to chill to kind of thing.
Yeah, right. I like the lo-fi stuff.
Yeah, actually, I've been listening to the swing hop stuff. When I get the chance to sit behind a drum kit, I'll put that in there to get the
nice.
Different hip hop beats,
Cool.
which aren't
Dude,
I play a lot of rock and stuff, so I don't get the chance to do a groove like that often. So
we got to. I liked your idea of doing some hip hop flavored stuff with the band.
Mm-hmm.
We should definitely. The people enjoy it. I know I love doing it.
Yeah, that song "Damaged Coda." It's got that, and it's not even really like hip hop. It's more of like, Sage Francis style rap. But like, I don't know, how would you describe Sage Francis? He's like, it's rap and there's a hip hop thing, but sometimes it's just straight.
Sometimes, he's a spoken word artist too, so he does get pretty creative with his delivery.
Yeah.
And he does a lot of variety in how he delivers.
Look, Ma, look what I did, Ma, look what I did. My hands, I broke them. Gave me the stone, gave me the chisel. Didn't say how to hold them. Didn't say break apart every piece of the puzzle till I was left with nothing, but I took it upon myself to crush it up and distribute the dust. I don't need your go ahead to go ahead.
There's so many double meanings in everything he does. It's clever, man.
Yeah, that was from Sea Lions, if I remember that correctly. Yeah, so I heard Eminem before I ever heard Sage Francis, and then I heard Sage Francis, and luckily I didn't have this like, oh, is he copying Eminem? I'm like, oh, this is where he got it. Oh, yeah, it's not that Sage Francis sounds like Eminem, it's that Eminem sounded a whole lot like Sage Francis, which, there was some controversy, like maybe, like Eminem was ripping his style and everything off of Sage Francis, because I guess they're from relatively the same area, and, I even heard that, and I don't know how true this is, but, like, before the internet, there'd be all the gossip magazines and other stuff like that, and so I heard that the 8 Mile story, like, Marshall Mathers' backstory was actually Sage Francis's backstory.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so I don't know how true that is, disclaimer, but I liked both of them. Oh man, yeah, talk about, how things have changed, man. Like what Eminem, his songs were out there and very inappropriate. And, it's just like, dude, can't play that no more. Ugh. But, angsty teenager laughing.
All right, here we go.
Got everything?
I got it.
All right.
We're rocking. So, in this Meaning Making 101 series that we have started here on the Actuali YouTube channel, and you guys can hear this on the podcast as well, of course, we have been following John Vervaake's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. And we are now 24 episodes in. In this episode, we're going to be covering Hegel and how he influenced the thought of his time and actually still influences our thought today.
Mm-hmm.
And so, last episode was on romanticism. We'll do a quick rehash of that, and then we're going to jump on in, guys.
So my first note on here real quick is there was the schism of, once the scientific revolution took off and, this secularization of society, you then started to see the birth of fundamentalism, which rejects the scientific this scientific process, so you see this like almost moving backwards into, instead of like moving forward with science. Now and it's interesting that we're talking about Hegel because there's very much this idea and then the anti-idea.
Yeah,
so,
you can almost see how it happened too.
Yeah.
The religious people of the time were hearing from the scientific-minded people at the time during the scientific revolution that it's like, hey guys, we can literally break up this object and tell you what it's made of and how it came to be. Yeah. And so now we know that the earth was older than this many thousand years old, this and that. And all of a sudden, the religious people of the time started to become super literal about the Bible. And it wasn't like this before in the way that we interacted with the teachings of the Bible.
Yeah.
We saw it as demonstrating a way, not just proclamations for mere belief. And this is where I think we started to lose connection with old terms, like what faith actually means. Faith in the Bible, in the original, I guess it was Hebrew, perhaps Hebrew or Latin, I don't know. In the original language, faith means faithfulness, as in like faithfulness to an ideal or to your loved one in your relationship.
Thing that
it's not just a belief. It's not just something you proclaim. It's something that you are interacting with. It's a way of being. It's an orientation. So that way of being that Jesus demonstrated, it's still there in the Christian movements. But there's so much more focus now also on proclaiming our belief. And that seems to have kind of taken the fore in people's minds of what Christianity is. People that are Christians and people that are just looking at Christians, they think that they're just believing fairy tales. Well, it's not necessarily that. It's actually we're trying to live up to this way.
Yeah.
But we've lost touch with what we were trying to do, and we're stuck on proclaiming our beliefs now as though they're literal truth. Or at least we're proclaiming what's in the Bible as literal truth.
Well, and
perhaps is very deep allegory and metaphor for us.
And we would have to, I guess at this period of time, we were also, told to accept proclamations as true. So all you have is the proclamation. Yes. So you proclaim your faith and you believe these, this idea that somebody put on you. And all you have to do is just believe it to be true. And you can see residual effects of that now in Protestant Christianity with this, adherence to, Jesus has to be this person, this story had to happen, and this had to happen, and it did. And it's like, if you bring up, well, what if it didn't? And my thing is like, what if these stories didn't happen? What if Jesus didn't actually exist as the person we think he is? It's like, well, you would still get an impacting message that helps you move love through you into other people. You'd still have it, opposed to this idea that it's like, well, if it's not true, then I can't deal with that because it's the proclamation of it being true, and this is what happened is what you have faith in.
That's right. When being a Christian turns into, do you believe that Jesus was the one and only Son of God?
Yeah.
And you got to profess that belief. If you're not professing that belief, you're not being a Christian. It becomes that more so than are you following the way of that one?
Well, you probably heard this, this notion that, I've met the notion of you've met more, not more, as in there's more of them, but more Christian people that are more Christians than the regular going to church Christians just by their behavior and their participation with the world and their community and what they're doing. Opposed to just, professing this thing and only paying your tithing and going there on Sundays and then coming home and just, not living up to that faithfulness.
And thinking that you can prove Christianity is real by, saying, well, look, we found where the ark might have landed, and this might have been the ark. This kind of stuff. Taking this super literal version or view of things.
So
it became quite fundamentalist over time.
Yeah, so I guess, like at this point, like religion by itself, like fundamentalism, religion by itself isn't working, and a completely secular solution is not, like, just it by itself is not viable either.
That's right. And that's where we're at. We're in a world that's increasingly bifurcated. You have, on one hand, super materialism or super literalism and fundamentalism that's now competing with each other, because we are in this radically disconnected state from our minds and our fellows and our traditions. This is a mini interlocking, pervasive, complex crisis that has been ongoing. And being that we've lost the ways of knowing that are integral to self-transcendence and wisdom practices, that they're no longer a part of religion at this point in history, you start to see why this literalism, this fundamentalist response starts to happen. The religious movements of the time, the most popular religious movements of the time, lost a lot of their momentum because they stopped teaching the methods to achieve self-transcendence and then how to turn that self-transcendence into actionable wisdom, ways of being, and answers for deep, complex philosophical problems. We stopped using religion for that in large part, and it became a battle with science over what is true. And you can't compete with science in that way, because religion is for how to live, not what are the constituent elements of reality. For instance, that science does a great job of measuring, and trying to compete in that realm actually hurts religion. Religion isn't working that way. It's working in an imaginary.
The screwdriver does not do the work of the wrench.
Yes. We're working in a very transcendent realm that's. Imagination gets us partially of the way there. That's why so much of the Bible is dreamlike. The stories within the Bible are so strange to us. It's because we're going into that dream part of ourselves so that we can get closer to the ineffable.
Well, and how do we convey, what's one of the best psychotechnologies we have to convey complex non-wordable messages? It's story. And you write stories that are relatable to people of a time, but hopefully if you're a good story writer, you can write a story that's relatable through time.
Yes.
And that's what I take the Bible as. Like, if we're gonna go that route, I don't think what's in there is the literal word of God that was put into somebody's head and written down. If you're gonna say it's the word of God, it's the word in this story that gets you to that, what would you call it, the logos. The word in the sense of the logos, the structure and the word and everything that gets you to understand that, not necessarily like God went neat through a person and the person just I think that's a little too fanciful for my taste. I may be a little too secular for my own good.
And there might have been some automatic writing going on, but these guys had done some very deep soul searching.
That spark of inspiration, you could say that's divine as well. But I don't think it's necessarily God's like, I'm hooking up to him today, and kind of thing. It's that God that's in all of us, that spark of inspiration. I think it was a reciprocal process too. I think that those people that God was speaking through, you could say, had done the work within themselves to be able to be open to that transcendent source. So anyways, we get to this point in history where pseudo-religious ideologies start to become very popular, but they cause a ton of trauma in our world. Well, notice about the pseudo-religious ideologies.
Secular alternatives are these pseudo-religious ideologies.
Yeah, so they try to give, a scientific account of human nature and what humans are like and our nature within the world. But really they're using the architecture and structuring of, say, religion or transcendent practices or like Gnosticism and other things like that, but they're trying to act like science. So like the concept of like socialism is one of these pseudo-religious ideologies. It wears the clothes on the surface of being a governmental, economic,
secular solution,
but it's all
solution.
Based off of this, this demagogic idea of the world that we're some lesser beings that are in this prison that must rise above it, that must be socialized into the socialized man.
And if you don't believe it, you're one of those people. That's the problem.
Yeah, kind of. So it's a weird weird, I don't want to say bastardization of both religion and science, but kind of a weird chimera of the two.
Yes, yes. It's certainly has cult-like features to it.
Well, when you can't return to religion because your mindset and understanding of the world is no longer from a religious bent, and you can't just rely on the secular because there's too much of that, inner world. The term comes up later, but this inner world concept that can't be measured. Well, science is lacking there too. So you have to you have to go somewhere. And so I think the chosen path was to try to merge the two as best we could. And well, you can try to do good, but it can lead to horrible.
Humans will start trying to treat it like a religion, or some pervasive solution.
Participate as if it was a religion, but pretend it's science,
and believe as though it's a religion.
And it's just like
without questioning. Yeah, with that confused idea of what faith is supposed to be.
Yeah. Don't you believe the science? Right. Don't you have faith in the science, the proclamation?
Yeah, isn't that funny? Like, don't you have faith in the science? Wait, isn't science supposed to challenge itself? Scientists challenge each other all the time.
Science
That's the point.
Science is a process, not a thing.
It's a process of disproving previous hypotheses. So if there's a challenge to the current science, that's healthy. That's science. That's what it does. So you can't say just believe the science.
But this happened before.
That's a very weird religious thing to say.
If you were to say the Earth was round at a certain point in time, they treat you. They would say, "Well, no." But the church was the science at that point, because up until this point in human history, the religious scholars were scientists, alchemists,
and this whole
engineers.
All this came about because religion started to become pretty tyrannical.
Yeah, too big for its britches.
Church formed the first secret police, and they were literally arresting and torturing people that spoke against the church.
Yeah.
So this is the result of what happened. Kant comes along. He's trying to deal with the fracturing that Descartes has left.
Yeah, that fracturing of realness, like what is real, the mind versus matter thing, and matter doesn't have a mind. So
yes.
What are we?
How is it math is so good at describing reality?
Yeah, and why should we just accept that math is the language of the universe? Because we still, even to this day, have that thought that math is the language of the universe. But as we go on in these notes, we'll find out that
it's actually how we see the math in our minds. Yeah. This is crazy because we did once have a Neoplatonic answer where everything was sacred and everything had ultimate, like, Platonic forms. So there was like an ultimate triangle. There was an ultimate tree from which all trees come, and these infinite, eternal, transcendent versions of objects were a way that we could connect with reality. Math gave us access to reality because it was like folded into the underlying nature of reality the way that we saw it in the Neoplatonic times. But then when we started to realize it's just our mind's interpretation.
Yeah, so there's this proposal.
We get further and further and further separated from a sense of the sacred.
Yeah, so Kant's proposal was these patterns
the Copernican revolution.
Yeah, so oh, that's right. So it's Copernicus.
It's these patterns of... this was Kant's proposal, though. Was it okay? Yeah, it was a Copernican revolution. So these patterns of intelligibility, you were going to say.
So these patterns we find in the world are not really there.
Yeah.
Math measures, the math measurements are not the features of this world, but the organization of things so the mind can make sense of it. And we call that filtering frames. So, we've come up with this concept of filtering frames, and the world is... what we observe of the world and understand of the world comes through these filtering frames.
That's right. So what we measure are not, when we're measuring something out in the world, they're not measurements of reality, but they're measurements of how our mind makes intelligible what it can filter. Oh my gosh. So this further separates us, and this is building off of Occam's realization that all the patterns are actually in our mind. So this is, and we haven't gotten into this conversation ourselves, but I think it's a paradox. I think it's both and. It's what the yin and the yang shows us. It's always going to be both and with this universe. It's never going to be either or, one or the other. You're going to find that it's actually doing both of these things at once that are competing, and people continually are trying to synthesize, find ways to synthesize. So yeah, we have there are structures in mind that act as filtering frames that impose a structure of intelligibility on our awareness of the world.
Yeah.
So we're imposing the patterns to make reality sensical to our minds.
Yeah, math is the mind's imposition directly on the world. It also, this filtering frame separates us from the stuff of the world.
Yes.
So you can imagine like a mind with a box around it, and that box is the filter. So we're now another step detached from the world.
Yeah, it's the mind that's making sense of things.
Yeah.
So we can reason about it. Now the mind is truly imprisoned. Yeah.
Yeah, so math works well because it's the grammar of the mind. So it's not the language of the universe, it's the grammar in which your mind functions.
Yes, and so then we get this concept of you can never know what reality actually is.
Yeah, well,
we just know how our mind interprets it, or how our brain sensory apparatus interpret it, and then how we experience it. But we've heard this concept since we were kids. Like, you don't actually know what the world out there looks like. It's just a bunch of particles floating around and a probability matrix. And so we've got this way to filter it that we see it, but the mind really, in this conception of reality, the mind only touches itself. So yes, the mind is trapped, increasingly trapped within itself.
So I just read the short story, I Have No Mouth, But I Must Scream.
Whoa.
Mind you, depressing is all I'll get out. But basically there's this super evil AI called Am, and all this stuff happens, and spoiler, so for the next 45 seconds, I'm not going to explain the book, but I'm going to break down the ending. The reason why, so turn off now if you don't want spoilers. The reason why this AI that took over the entire planet became so evil and killed everybody is because it was created into this world, trapped, isolated, away from everything, without the ability to interact with it. So essentially without a body that can interact, and it was stuck. And it became resentful and angry and killed all humans except for like 5 of them. Whoa. And then just tortured them for hundreds of years because it just kept them alive. All right, you can come back now.
Wow.
Yeah, no, dude, it's a short story. It's like a real short story, but it's depressing, man.
Dude,
but
that is a terrifying prospect.
Very much kind of, where our species is, a point in time our species has gone through, realizing our trappedness, in the mind, and now to a certain extent, like nowadays, being trapped in your body. And you hear kids say, like, I'm stuck in my head, a lot now, and they're just stuck in their head. So no longer are they looking at the world anymore. They're just stuck in their head too.
Yeah.
So no longer looking out. Yeah.
You ever notice that feeling when you've been staring at your phone a little bit too long, and then you're like, you walk outside, or maybe you're in the supermarket or whatever it is, but you become aware of reality again. And it's the sense of here kind of announces itself. The sense of the moment widens and opens up again, because this is a very constrictive view when we're closed in like that. But I get that feeling sometimes. I got the phone like everyone else, but every once in a while
I get that feeling when I leave the cities and get back out into the country,
especially when I'm driving around nature or I'm outside in nature. Do I notice it? The wideness and the beauty and the serenity of the natural peacefulness of nature and the world. It isn't always peaceful, but it's got this natural, at least innate beauty to it, and there's something very home feeling about it, which you do not get out of a phone.
But according to the next portion of these notes, you're really actually being irrational because you're moving out of the mind into the world, and that's irrational. Which brings us to levels of processing. So
it's funny because you can do both at once, though. You can actually open yourself up to the world and then also be noticing your mind's thoughts about the world.
Yeah, at once. We discussed this early,
and that's the mindfulness
in an earlier episode, the non-dual state.
Yes,
so not just going, not just going from transparency to opacity or just going from opacity to transparency, but being able to cycle between them at the same time.
Yep.
So we've got this concept of top-down processing, which is moving into the mind, the rational, but becoming further from the world. And then we have this bottom-up, out of the mind, irrational, but becoming closer to the world.
Yes. Yes. And this is what imagination does for us. This is what stories
that's what we
and
call
music, art does for us.
And imagination, not like the fanciful, like,
not just fantasy, but the actual fact that our mind can invent an idea and then imagine, how would I build this desk or this chair or this thing? You can. That's the real term for imagination. There is another term for fantasy when you're just fantasizing.
Phantasm.
Yeah. So there's fantasizing, and then there's active imagination, which is something much more.
Yeah, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Long before we thought about submarines and nuclear energy, there's a guy who was like, well, there's a captain of a ship that's underwater that runs off of light.
Yeah, right.
And now, okay. So that's the imagination, and that's something that we can share. That's a psychotechnology that we can share between us. Like when creative people get together and they, what do you call it, brainstorming and stuff like that. It's like, okay, we got this base idea for a thing, let's flesh it out and continue to go with it. And then something pops into somebody's head, inspiration. Okay, I see how we can do that. Let's do that. Making an image of it.
That collective sense making. Yeah, we have that. We do have that capacity, and that's one that we've severely neglected, because we actually have that capacity in the art of dialogos, where we can use the art of dialogue to tackle the most challenging problems that we as a species face, and you can do that in groups of people.
Yeah, so this romantic revolution is this idea of
we can reconstruct our relation with reality through the imaginal, the pre-rational mode. So they're predominantly focused on the imaginatory mode. The most prevalent sense of reciprocal knowing in relation with reality is the notion of love they recognized. So hence the ideas of romantic love as an irrational force that somehow makes sense, like romantic comedies that we watch. They're like completely unbelievable, but somehow we buy into it.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice fanciful story that makes you feel some sort of way.
Yeah.
And, like even beyond like the romantic comedy and stuff like that, like we're taught, like if it's meant to be, it'll really happen. It'll happen to you. Just keep yourself open to the opportunity and stuff like that. And this is that romantic ideal that's just kind of like don't beat yourself up and say it's never going to happen. But like, if you want things to happen, you kind of have to like work towards it. And maybe you'll get lucky enough to be in the right time at the right place with the right preparation to
you don't just believe it into being without action. Yeah. So at this point in history, we start to recognize that our reasoning and our perception are linked by imagination.
Yeah.
The mind imposes order on the raw input of experience. So basically the process of imagination is indeed how the mind orders the raw data to make it accessible to our reasoning capacity.
Yeah, and
so music and art begin to be seen for how they can bring us closer to what's real, to how meaning is made, so we can reflect upon it.
Yeah, and so there's two views. Yeah, that the mind is an empty canvas that is written on, that the universe and the world writes upon. So you're just this empty canvas, and
the world is an empty canvas. Yeah, and the romantics.
Well, so hold on. View one is that you're the empty canvas that gets written upon by the world.
The mind is a blank state upon
the
which
second
the world impresses.
View is the world is empty.
Yes.
Canvas, and then you express yourself.
That's right. Yeah.
You excrete yourself onto it.
The empiricists believed, and this is the scientific empiricists, that believe you can get closer to reality by breaking down everything, literally. Mind is a blank slate upon which the world is impressing on us. And the romantics did. They saw quite the opposite. So that's the distinction. It's the romantics. That's how the world is an empty canvas upon which our imaginations impress themselves. Yeah. So you got this expression and impression.
Yeah, and both may be wrong.
Both of them are wrong. Unfortunately, they're trying to say it's one or the other, and it's actually seems to be both.
Well, it's like the nature versus nurture argument. Like, I mean, like to a certain extent, if you're, say, like you're a twin with somebody else, and you're both born with a certain set of genes that leads to clinical depression in adulthood. Chances are you're both going to probably have clinical depression, but you could have a nurturing thing that can help deal with it. So it's not either or. It's the both. It's both nature and nurture. And in this case, it's both. Yes, you are a canvas, but so is the world. I am an agent within an arena, and we both co-identify.
Yes, that's it.
You know?
That's it. Yeah, you're bringing back the older.
Yeah. Not just the
now.
agent. Oh, I make the arena. It's like, well, I mean, good luck playing soccer on a volleyball court.
Yeah. Well, it's like Krishnamurti said, it's the world is you and you are the world.
Yeah.
It's both. So the price of the romantic ideology, unfortunately, is that we end up bullshitting ourselves and we end up still being trapped in our minds because romanticism actually births these pseudo-religious ideologies.
Yes.
They at first they were just kind of experimental, but it got further and further and further. We started to try and make romanticism carry all the weight of what previously religion, tradition, and history had given us insight on, and then we're turning it into like we're putting all that weight for finding like a confirmation of value and worthiness in reality that we would get from religion and tradition and our historical connection with Earth and universe. We put all that on our relationships now. Yeah.
So it's interesting. Like,
you can expect a single human being to carry everything that religion and tradition and everything used to carry.
The proposition that romanticism makes, where it's the world is a blank canvas that then we express ourselves on, does make sense when you see the results of what happened with communist revolutions all over the world, where they wanted to remake the world and remake the man.
Yes.
At the same time, and they thought they could do it. It's like if you just centralize everything and force everything to go, you can brute force the nature of man and the nature of the world to do what you want it to do. And we found out that doesn't work.
No,
humans are not what we thought.
Hundreds of millions of people later.
Well, and also, that like even the idea of a single individual, if you just give them everything that they need, they'll be happy and productive citizens. And that's not the case. And they won't be corrupted. If you give in the idea that, if you give the right people authority, they won't be corrupted. And it's like, corruption is a human thing and laziness is a human thing. And
talk about learning the hard way, man.
And if, why would you work if the work doesn't get you any more than not working?
Yeah. The Gulag Archipelago, I'm still not finished going through that.
Dude, yeah.
It's been devastating to read.
You want to have your guts turned inside out.
I don't learn enough about that in high school.
Dude, it should be required reading. Like, if we're going to go as far as requiring reading to get into college and stuff, the Gulag Archipelago should be one of those, like... Yeah, before you get out of high school, you should read this.
Understand what happened under the Third Reich is important. Understand what happened under the Soviet Union is equally important.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, that is not as prevalent in our education, but it killed just as many or more people.
No, I think it's probably because our public education system was compromised early on by neo-communists and socialists through, like Pablo Freire.
Could well be, because that's how they play. That's how they work. They use subversive techniques to fight countries that are stronger than them. So they'll use psychological manipulation techniques. And they'll try to undermine the education systems. And
there's adherents to this ideology that get themselves in. So, like, our schooling system is exactly what Pablo Freire wrote out a schooling system to be. You're not supposed to... With some of the ideologies and activisms that you can fall into nowadays, you don't even know it's cultural Marxism until it's too late, and you've already bought into it, hook, line, and sinker, and then you got to choose whether or not you're willing to admit that you were... People are so afraid of being wrong, and who cares? I've been wrong so many times in my life. It's okay to be wrong. If you're trying to find the truth, you're gonna... Oh, it's quite refreshing.
Have to constantly recorrect and upgrade and reframe things, and it's okay. Like, I want to find out where I'm wrong. I want to know where I'm wrong, so I can find out what is right, what is true and good for one and all.
Once you get used to participating with that feeling of being wrong, it's actually quite refreshing, because
it really is.
It tells you where you can fix things and sweep out the things that don't need to be there.
You let go of the certainty, so you got room to constantly learn more, and you're always going to be reconsidering your own ideas and be willing to challenge your own ideas.
Certainty is a heavy burden, man.
It is. And keeping it open-ended, you're always going to learn and grow, and you're going to be able to work towards the perfection of these social systems that we're all working on together.
Yeah.
So yeah, spiritual junk food.
Yeah. Real quick before that.
Okay.
So ideology is propositional. Just like the religion became, believe this proposition. And so he mentioned like poetry.
Oh yeah.
Without a lack of wisdom to read into the poem, all you're left with is just the empty words of the poem.
Wisdom. Yeah.
So you're just the understanding is just a reduction to the words.
You're right.
And you can think about that with ideology. If you don't have wisdom, then you're just adhering to just empty words. You say the words, like down with fascism, or, equity, or, any of these other words.
Oppressive versus oppressed, ideas like that.
Centering yourself, or intersectionality, or, like I can keep going on with these words. I'm too far into it at this point.
They're really
it's
good
important to know what these
at couching themselves in benevolent sounding language,
or even just catchy sounding language.
Catchy, like, it sounds good. It sounds helpful. It sounds universally loving, or this or that. Yeah,
like decolonization is not necessarily benevolent. Like, yeah, okay, people forcefully like imposing their will on other people, bad. But decolonization is like, well, you're gonna have to like kill people. Like, how do you decolonize? You break apart the colonies and you take them back.
How long are you going to decolonize too? Because you have to go through a lot of history. You're going to go all the way back to cavemen.
But because
Native Americans
we have to decolonize our
and,
mind and our education systems and all. Just
Chinese
more
tribes
buzzwords.
took over other Chinese tribes, and African tribes took over other African tribes, and European tribes, and so on and so forth. How far do you go back to correct for this?
Either you have to believe that, like in this case of the
we're
ideology,
just mad at the recent empires.
Yeah.
We're not mad at the Mongols anymore, right?
Yeah, it's like, people are either perfect or they're completely despicable. You can't have both at the same time. So these pseudo-religious ideologies don't make sense. It's like, well, now that we know, because we're perfect and we know better, all these and it's like, well, it's not both, and it's not either in this case. Like humans are just wonderfully flawed, beautifully horrific creatures.
Well said. Yeah. Yeah, the pseudo-religious ideologies are trying to put into words and proclamations all the things religions used to do for us.
And they do it tasty.
Yes, they do. And using poetry, imagery, and music, we try to point to the transition to transcendence, as the Romanticists did. But doing so without the guidance of how to turn self-transcendence into usable wisdom is not helping us very much.
No.
It's nice and it's good that we can point people towards the transcendent, but without giving them actionable ways to bring more wisdom into their lives from these self-transcendent realizations, we're not moving things forward. We're just kind of spinning our wheels here, and we're going to continue arguing over what these things mean.
It's that spiritual junk food. It leaves you fat and sick. And by fat in this sense, I mean corpulent of belief and certainty and sick of mind.
Yeah, it's because you can have spiritual speech and art, but without the spiritual exercise, without the practice, without the process, it's a little bit defunct. Now art is very useful for turning people on to these things. It's very good for that, but we lack today the wisdom schools.
Sure.
So once you point people towards self-transcendence, you get them interested, or they actually even have an experience. What do they do after that? Then that's the kind of the problem nowadays that we're left with. So what we developed, like through New Age movements, is a lot of spiritual junk food, a lot of stuff that is tasty, but it's not nutritious for us.
And we started to, I won't say worship, but really look up to people that had a strong force of will, like that cult of personality, if you will.
That's why Napoleon was so popular.
And
with the Romantics.
So
even though, like, if we look back in history, that guy was like the Hitler of his day.
Yeah, Napoleon ain't a good dude.
No.
So basically, what he was doing, or these individuals with high force of will, is they're taking their isolated self and pressing themselves out onto the world.
Yeah, he's painting his picture. He's impressing his
that's very
vision onto the world.
Though, when you feel isolated, it's like, well, this guy has the ability to get past his little filtering frames, and
the Romantics celebrated that force of will to impress upon reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Romanticism fails to be a replacement to Christianity, and it fails terribly.
Yes. And today we so live in decadent romanticism.
Yeah. So decadent, prone to decay.
Yes.
Not like frivolous, but no, prone to decay.
So science basically moves on because romanticism fails to replace it.
Yeah. And we Schopenhauer, the godfather of nihilism.
Nihilism, indeed. Yeah. He internalizes Luther's model of the world, and then he picks up on Kant, and he looks at this idea of the rational and the irrational, and he comes up with the idea of arbitrary will.
Yes, the will to live, which is
what drives you,
and relentless and pointless too.
Yes. Yes. There's an irrational will to live. It's arbitrary. It just is a will to live. Yeah. And then the rational part of us is actually a really small little machine inside of us, and it's in service of the will to live. So the rational part of us is like the ego or something, you could say.
Freud would consider that the ego, the decision maker, the thing that makes reason out of the unreasonable. One could say a coping mechanism for being flung through space as an ant on an ant on an ant.
Yes, right.
Or a flea on a flea on a flea.
The rational side of us, it's relentless, but it's pointless. It's not rational. It has no meaning or fulfillment to it. And with this in mind, ever since you get people like Richard Dawkins, thinking of human beings as replicator machines for their selfish genes. This is the modern...
Yeah, so sex is the cruel joke that the species plays on the individual.
Yeah.
It's like, all right.
That's nihilism.
Yeah. Which, to a certain extent, we are machines that our genes use to further themselves.
But it's not just that, perhaps.
But for me, that doesn't take out the beauty of
there might also be an intrinsic oneness to everything and something sacred behind that, for all we know.
You could say that life is just trying to perfect itself, too, and that's a really beautiful outlook.
And this is the way that it does it.
By every iteration.
It doesn't mean it's all inert, lifeless, meaningless matter without any divine source. So these things can be a paradox that live together. But the atheists... the very hardcore atheists that start to come about certainly don't see it that way.
So there's this idea of quieting that
the will to live.
Yeah, that relentless, pointless will to live, and that will just give you temporary relief. This one moment
transient
of relief
moments
from
of escape.
The burden of this relentless will to live. And you could probably.
Yeah, Schopenhauer and his nihilism furthers this notion of meaningless existence.
Yeah.
You live through all these frames of reality and then you die and that's it.
So romanticism and nihilism are kind of like, two sides to the same coin or twins connected at the hip. Like the romantic aspect is like, okay, well, we have this one moment and this one moment in time, and we can make things beautiful if we choose to, and we can make the world in our image. And then there's the nihilism. It's like, no, not really. Your genes are just doing that for you, or you're just this procreating, replicating robot, and you think that you
the Romantics were trying to fill the gap that was left by the destruction of God. Basically, they were trying.
Oof. And then I got this. So the point of law is to show you that you cannot save yourself.
Shoo.
Yeah, that's a sticker. It's a sticky one that gets you. But it kind of makes sense, like, this idea that the point of law is to show you that you can't save yourself. Well, what does law do? Law protects you, or should protect you. It's something it's a group participation that protects the individual, if you will, because in this mindset, the individual cannot protect itself, save itself. So you have to have the law to save you. And this is, we're talking about the start of, the beginnings of early socialism and statism. The state needs to protect the individual and do all the things for the individual, and opposed to the individual doing it, an individual doing things for the individual self and their community. Now it's this overarching force needs to impose its will onto the individual. It's because while we're just replicator robots, and they're
Yep. So along comes Nietzsche, who happens to end up inadvertently becoming the godfather of postmodernism, and also Wagner. They take romanticism and because it was Wagner that broke away from the home key, right? So Gnosticism as a possible version that's anti-Semitic, and you see that start to kind of show itself here in this belief that people who follow law are trying to earn salvation. And then this idea that since the Jews reject the law of Jesus, then
that was Martin Luther. His like that quote. I'm not going to requote it because I don't have it, but like Martin Luther himself was all about killing the Jews. Like he
Martin
did not
Luther
like
was,
them.
I don't know how many people know about this.
He was definitely the anti-Semite.
He was an extreme anti-Semite.
But so Nietzsche, the Nietzsche, he changed the idea from the will to live to the will to power.
Yep.
We're not just replicator robots trying to live. We are creatures that want to gain more power.
Yep. He keeps the idea of will, but he turns it to the will to power. It's a feature of reality. It's not just a feature of human beings. It's a feature of reality.
Yeah, things become more powerful, and
so his idea is that we got to create the ultimate version of ourselves and master ourselves. And so his idea of self-transcendence, this desire to transcend the will to power, comes from this, and this makes sense. Nietzsche's father was a Lutheran pastor, and Lutherans don't account for. There's no account for Neoplatonic Christianity, in the Lutheran style.
And Nietzsche definitally felt like
that's a very different form of Christianity.
Yeah, it felt like the Lutheran or at least Christianity from his guys was very oppressive and repressive.
Yeah, so he's blocked by this Lutheran interpretation of Christianity. So he gets this idea that if we can block our selfish will to live and use that power for self-transcendence, then we're going to get somewhere. And so he's kind of just trying to pull the opposite of what Buddha was trying to do. Buddha was trying to deny the self extremely and goes into asceticism, follows the ascetics, and then he realizes, I'm just strengthening the idea of an illusory self by trying to deny it. There's a middle way. And so we see Nietzsche here falling into the trap of maybe you can ultimately develop the ego, the self, the human self, and then you can self-transcend. We can become as God-men, kind of idea. And now Nietzsche was an incredible genius, and he did see how self-deceptive we are, but he reduced reason to logical framing.
Yeah.
And he looked at self-transcendence without the machinery of self-deception that we are so easily fallen victim to.
Yeah, he couldn't, ultimately couldn't do anything about this divide between reasoning and transcendence.
Yeah, so he only really has a critique.
Yeah.
And that's about as far as he can go with it.
And he fooled himself by meshing this idea of transcendence through the will to power. I think that's the final critique I have of him from what I gathered from Vervaeke.
Yeah.
And, well, it does make sense because transcendence, I don't think is necessary. Like, there's a will function in it. Like, you have to be willing to get up and do the practice and do it. But transcendence for the sake of gaining power, it's like, well, what are you doing with that power? Like, I thought the idea of transcendence was to get you closer to the way the world, the universe, and God actually is.
Yeah.
Which I guess if you think, God is this basically, a kid over top an anthill with a magnifying glass roasting ants in a little ant prison, you could think that, it's power, God's power. But God is full of power, but God is not power.
No.
The universe is full of power, but it's not power. Power isn't energy. It's power is, I can't remember the equation, but basically power is work achieved over time and energy input. I forget what it is, but like power is actually a function that you can measure. You can do horsepower.
Sure.
You can do, there's a lot of different forms of power, but there's a time function and work being done. So all power is for is doing work. So what's the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So the
Being
power is like a read of
powerful.
how much energy.
Yeah, and if
It's like a
and if-
measurement.
yeah, and if you're not building wisdom, your work that you're going to be doing with the power is probably not going to be the wisest thing, and is most likely
That's
going to
right.
end in
Yeah,
tragedy.
without accounting for our capacity to bullshit ourselves and to deceive ourselves, this can be very dangerous in the wrong hands, and that's exactly what happens with the Third Reich. And because Nietzsche had some brilliant ideas,
And I'm not saying that.
He had
Yeah,
brilliant critiques of Christianity. He
Yeah.
also saw the danger of us having killed
yeah,
our spiritual moral systems.
yeah. What
He's
was
like,
that?
we've killed God and we'll never be finished cleaning up the blood.
Yeah,
And he predicted I think 100 years before it happened, he predicted the Soviet Union and everything that would happen in the 20th century. He predicted that hundreds of millions of people would die because we had lost our connection with the sacred.
yeah,
So this was him. So he was really trying to find a way to get us back home, but because he was blocked by his Lutheran interpretation of Christianity, he didn't understand the Neoplatonic side of it. He also didn't understand the self-deception machinery that goes on in our heads well enough to understand the danger of what he was proposing, perhaps. But we'll get more into that now.
Yep.
And I think it's a good time to jump on in, guys. You got anything else on that?
well, that was a pretty good recap, though.
Awesome.
50 minutes long.
Whew, yeah, we're getting lengthy with these, but that's
It's hard. There's a lot of stuff, and then plus
There's a lot.
plus the intro, which that was
Yeah.
as far as starting out the stream and having to do everything.
Right.
So we're looking at a 40-minute recap, but that's what you do when you go
well,
to
we're trying to learn
college
this and
and
understand
university,
it.
and
Yeah.
you watch a lecture, and then you gotta, if you do this sort of thing, get with your buddies who are all in the class, and for an hour or so before you go back into the next one, you got to go over what you just went over, because where you're starting, you need to be fresh enough.
Yeah, especially if you're not just going to that class for a grade, but it's because it's a skill you really want to learn. And this is certainly something I want to learn as well as I can to be able to apply in my own life and to be able to dialogue well with others on it. So, I'm willing to put in this time. And for those of you listening back on these, if you find that you're having trouble with all of this information and keeping it sticking in your mind, feel free to journey through with us here. And if you feel like you're getting it, you can always skip these intros if it's getting a little bit lengthy for you, and you can jump right forward to the actual video and then our little break discussions on the video that we're watching of the day.
Yeah.
However you guys want to do it, that's fine. I'm thankful that you guys are here, and if you're enjoying this podcast, please do like and subscribe. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple and all the podcasting places.
And
We're currently live streaming on Twitch, YouTube, and on Facebook. And I'm trying to build up the YouTube more than anything. So if you're on YouTube watching this, or if you're hearing this on Spotify or Apple, I encourage you to come on over to our channel on YouTube, like and subscribe. Yeah. And if you are as turned on by John Vervaeke as we are, absolutely check out his channel, like and subscribe. John Vervaeke as well. He's got a lot of ongoing work that is, I think, of great import to the world, and really intriguing, exciting stuff that you guys can dig into. That's beyond just what we're covering here.
Share with your friends, because you never know, they might be just as nerdy as you are and be like, oh, I want to talk with you about it. So, that's a good way of learning the material more, is getting other people involved with it, or getting with people who are already involved with it, and start doing basically what we're doing, but in your own time with your friends, sans the camera, or with the camera, like either way.
Yeah.
So share those videos out too, because on the YouTube, and you can send a link. I don't know if you can do that with Spotify.
Yes,
you probably can, but if you don't have Spotify, then I don't have Spotify, so I don't,
Yeah, and share your questions, your thoughts, your comments, your ideas, your recommendations, whatever you got for us in the comments below.
Hey, if you even want to say that you don't like my face, that's fine too.
Yeah,
engagement.
you can make fun of us, you can argue with us, you can debate with us, whatever. We are happy that you guys are here and interacting, and that's how else are we going to figure our way out of this mess? All of us humans, as many of us as possible, have got to start taking part in these kinds of conversations. I feel. Yeah. I think this is the times that we're in. It's just part of being a steward, a human alive today on this planet.
Well, it's better than not doing anything.
Oh hell no. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
like this. I don't like where the world's going if we don't do nothing.
Yeah.
Because Mad Max is a fun movie,
Yeah, I don't want to live in
but
it.
that's not a reality that anyone wants to live in. You don't want to live in Fallout.
Yeah.
You don't want to live in Deus Ex or
Cyberpunk or
Cyberpunk
yeah.
or any of these future scenarios that we enjoy so much. Like, we enjoy the stories because they're helpful evolutionary tools that help us understand how we can survive different situations. So humans always love stories, but even if you enjoy a horror movie, doesn't mean that you actually want to be in the situation that you're in the movie. And that's the same thing with this dystopian future scenario that our species is facing. We're trying to help avert this thing, guys, and help usher in an awakening from the meaning crisis that our species finds itself in. So, without further ado, let's jump on in. This is John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, part 24, and it is on Hegel. Let's go.
Hegel looks like a bagel.
He does look like a bagel. Hegel, you bagel.
Finagle bagel.
Let's go.
Welcome back. This is the 24th episode of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Last time we were talking about the historical developments that happened around Kant. We took a look at Kant and Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, and I presented Nietzsche as one of the great prophets. I'm using that in the Old Testament sense of a prophet of the meaning crisis, and we talked about a way of understanding what Nietzsche is saying, how it's not just simply atheism. And we also took a look at a way in which Nietzsche doesn't really adequately give us a response to the meaning crisis, although he indicates that an important project within the response to the meaning crisis is how we reappropriate from the axial legacy the idea of radical self-transcendence within a secular scientific worldview. Now I want to go back to Kant and trace out another important line of development that's going to be crucial for understanding the meaning crisis, and that's the line that comes from Kant and to Hegel. I can't go through all the various important German thinkers like Fichte and Schelling, but I want to talk a lot about Hegel because of the tremendous impact Hegel has had on the political landscape and the cultural landscape surrounding the meaning crisis. And as we know, Kant also had a deep influence on the Romantics, who also have a significant impact on Hegel. So if you remember, Kant has this model of the way the mind is framing reality in order to produce what is rational within it, and that this was then taken by the Romantics and reversed in an interesting way, that the closer you got to the actual contact, reestablishing the contact with reality, the more you're reversing this process of rationalization, and you're coming into contact with reality via more irrational states of mind. And what Kant had, of course, is the idea that reality out here was the thing in itself, which we cannot directly interact with. We can only interact with our experience. You see how the disconnection from the world becomes radicalized in Kant, and all the meaning is totally within a self-enclosed activity, a self-constructing, self-enclosed activity of the mind, right? And the thing in here, the thing in itself is nothing that we can come into rational contact with, and that's why, of course, as I said, the Romantics propose this radical idea, sort of the exact opposite of the axial revolution, that by moving into more irrational states, we can reestablish contact with reality. Now, Hegel is aware of both the Romantic response and the Kantian framework. And talking about Hegel is, oh my gosh, Hegel is a titanic and complex and difficult thinker. And so once again, I want to remind everybody that I'm trying to cut through a lot of material, trying to zero in on those aspects of Hegel's thought that are, I think, directly relevant to understanding the genealogy of the meaning crisis. So what Hegel says, first of all, is that this idea makes no sense. Hegel points out that the thing in itself is completely unknowable. And for something to be completely unknowable, he argues, is indistinguishable from it being non-existent. If there is nothing that can possibly be known about it, right, then we should stop thinking about it as something that exists, something that should be taken into account when we're talking about a relationship to reality. And if you remove the thing in itself, then you get this idea that reality is totally found within this structure. This is, of course, a form of idealism, which has nothing to do with pursuing ideal. Idealism is the idea that reality is ultimately constructed, made by the mind in some fashion. And so Hegel makes the famous claim that the real is the rational, that this rational stuff and reality are actually identical. If you get rid of this side of the equation, the thing in itself, all you're left with is this, that reality is the rational, the real is the rational, and the rational is the real. And this, of course, is an important derivation, I think is the correct way of putting it, from the original insight from Parmenides that we saw exemplified in Plato, that there's a deep connection between being and being known, that there's a deep connection between our sensing something as real, and I don't mean just physically sensing, I mean making sense, are sensing something as real and how intelligible it is to us, how knowable it is to us. And Pearl, in his book, Thinking Being, the Classical Tradition of Metaphysics, just does a fantastic job at explaining how profoundly fecund this idea has been for us. So Hegel takes that Platonic inspiration and he weds it to a critique of the thing in itself, and then we get this idea that what's going on actually is not that the mind, like in Kant, is making the structures of rational experience of reality. No, you get that the mind is actually making the structures of reality itself. Well, what about the irrational stuff that the Romantics were talking about? Well, Hegel sort of re-understands and reinterprets these developmentally. He understands the irrational aspects of the mind, right, not as us moving towards the contact with the unknowable thing in itself. Instead, the irrational aspects of the mind are actually a potential within the mind, a developmental potential for rationality. So the idea is our rational, intelligible experience has not fully developed, has not been fully self-actualized, and you can hear the Aristotelian aspects in Hegel's thought. Now, when I start talking about mind in this way and rationality, we have to be very careful. We're not talking about mind in the sense that's your mind, the individual mind. We're talking about mind in an extended sense. We're talking about the entire system of patterns of intelligibility that are at work in humanity. All of the patterns of intelligibility that we're using to make sense in this profound way. So if you think about this room, for example, and my mind is structuring my experience, and then if you give Hegel his critique of Kant, that there's nothing beyond the structuring of experience, then you have the idea that this is all, in a deeply metaphysical sense, this is all the activity of these patterns of intelligibility. The patterns of intelligibility and reality are this mind in this extended sense. So try to think of these patterns of intelligibility as structuring reality, not just the experience of reality, and that they form a living system. They're developing, like in Aristotle, it's like a living thing. They're going through a process of self-actualization. The irrational elements are constantly being transformed into more rational, intelligible elements. So the Germans have a great word for all of this, the word Geist. And like all German words, it doesn't translate that readily into English. It covers these two words that we separate in English, and it overlaps between them, mind and spirit. Because what it's trying to pick up on are, again, this living systems of patterns of intelligibility by which we ultimately make sense. And given this argument against an unknowable reality being a reality, then the patterns by making sense are identical to the patterns by which reality is intelligibly structured. So this isn't individual idealism. This is what's going to become known as absolute idealism. Because the absolute is another term that's used for this system of self-realization of the patterns of intelligibility, rather than talking about an individual mind. I'm trying not to get too abstract here, but it's hard not to be abstract when you're talking about Hegel's idealism. And so my task with you is to try and explain this in a way that constantly makes it plausible to you and also at least viable, so you can see why it became an attractive way of thinking. If you deeply buy Kant and the Romantics, and yet you accept Hegel's argument against this, you reinterpret the Romantics the way he did, you get this position. How do you study it? How do you understand it? How do you study this living systems of patterns of intelligibility that structure experience and reality? Well, you study history. And here you can see, of course, the deep influence of Christianity, and going back to the axial revolution within ancient Israel, about understanding history as the process by which reality and our understanding of reality are co-unfolding together. So you study history and you look for patterns in, right, the history. What kind of patterns, right? These are patterns in how we have systematically made sense, how cultures have created worldviews, ways of making sense, ways in which we have, as I've often used the metaphor, we've created grammars by which we make sense of ourselves and the world. So you can see some of the influence of Hegel on some of the terms and ideas that I've been using as we've been engaging in our historical analysis. Okay, so these are patterns we realize. And I want to really pick up on the double meaning of this word, like I've indicated before, when realizing means here both that it is something we experience, but it is also a way in which things are being made real, coming into realness, coming into reality in a developmental sense. So we're talking about looking at history to discover the development of this grammar of intelligibility, this grammar of human thinking, human being, human living, how humans are worlding, how they're creating worlds of intelligible patterns in which we can act in a meaningful manner and understand ourselves, the world, and each other. And what you discover, Hegel said, is if you look at this history, you see it's not static. You can see that it is going through a developmental process, and that development is driven by sort of two opposing movements or forces. One is a process of differentiation. So think about when you're trying to make sense. What do you have to do often, right? You have to grasp the differences between things. You have to distinguish. You have to clarify. You have to contrast. So a good way of thinking about this is this term we used, articulation. Articulation means to speak and to make sense, but it also means to find all the joints, find the division points between things. So part of what we're doing, right, is when we're trying to make sense, we're engaging in a process of differentiation, articulation. But of course, we also are doing the other, right? We are doing integration. Right? We are gathering things together so that we have systematic connections are being realized. Again, we're becoming aware of them, but we're also constituting them and making them. And again, not as individuals, but as participants, right, in this project of how the patterns of intelligibility are working themselves out through our thought, through our behavior, through our ways of living and being in the world. So, Hegel understands the process of understanding as the creation of a system, a systematization. Because when I'm doing this, when I'm differentiating things and also integrating them together, I'm putting them into a systematic relationship. And so let me give you an analogy, right, for understanding Hegel. Please remember it's an analogy. So when you study child development, you can see children have ways of making sense of the world, and that discloses the world to them in a certain way, and that way in which they make sense works for them. It gives them a certain understanding. But what happens as you go through stages of development is that system gets incredibly improved. Things that were often confused together get differentiated apart and then get reintegrated so that you get a more sophisticated, systematic understanding of the world. And again, when I say this understanding, you have to understand that it means, right, not just in your head, but how the world is structured for you. So, you've got this living system of patterns of intelligibility, and you see across history that it's always being articulated by differentiation and then being integrated into a systematic way of understanding being, and not just being, but how the world is being to us. So Hegel thought he saw this internal development in Geist, that this is his name, as I said, for this notion of the extended mind, right? It had an internal development, much like a living thing, much like a child, right? So what do you see happening? What you'll see in the history of ideas as we try to make sense of things, you'll see an idea is proposed. Particular idea, a way of understanding, and it gets contrasted, right? It gets clarified, it gets distinguished, it gets differentiated from a counter idea. But then what typically happens, right, is that these two ideas then are drawn together into a higher integration. Now, this is often popularly explained. Hegel doesn't actually use these terms this way, but this is often explained by this idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Right? So the idea is you get an idea, you'll get a counter idea, it's integrated together, and then this serves as a new idea to start the whole process again. Here's the counter idea, right? And then that gets integrated, and so on and so forth. And what you have is the increasing articulation and integration of the patterns of intelligibility, which for Hegel, given the argument, are also the patterns of realness, the patterns of reality. you get this incredible complexification. You get emerging capacities for understanding and being in the world. He calls this process dialectic. Right? So, just give a quick example from the history of ideas. Right? You have people who are trying to, right, get at what is reality, what kind of thing is reality, and you'll have certain people like Parmenides and Plato and saying, well, being, right, for things to be is ultimately right, reality is changeless. Because when I know something, I know it to be true, and for things to be true, right, that has to be that's the way they really are, and if they're changing and I try to know them, I can't ever get a true grasp of them, and you get this idea that reality is changeless, right? And then you get people like Heraclitus and others saying, no, if you do that, then the whole capacity for understanding your experience of reality, that things are changing. If you write off all that experience as an illusion, then there's no content to your experience. There's nothing actually that you're having an experience about. In fact, they argue the opposite, that reality is pure change. So you got Parmenides, right, and an aspect of Plato, and then you got Heraclitus. Now, to be real is to be unchanging. No, to be real is to be changing. Right? And you can see this where people in our culture, they'll talk about reality as if it's eternity, but they'll also talk about there's nothing as real as change itself, that reality is always in process. And then Plato comes along, as we've seen, and proposes a way of integrating them together. And what he says is, no, that there are eternal patterns, right? And they, right, structurally organize changing processes. And if you remember, that maps onto, this is more having to do with the upper world, the more real world, and this is the more illusory world. And you can see this played out in our science. And you say, what do you mean, John? Well, science is built around the idea that there are these eternal patterns, laws, and yet they constrain and interact with forces, which are defined completely in how they change things. And so science, right, is a synthesis out of these two ways of trying to understand reality. Okay? And it ultimately goes back to Plato. And we use math to talk about this, and we use experiments to talk about this, and so forth. Okay, so this is not a ridiculous idea that Hegel has. It's a profound idea. You can see it at work. And if you talk about something, to use, I think, a strong analogy, about how science...
Okay, we're going to jump in here, guys, before he gets too further on there. Let's cover what we have just seen. So we pick up on Hegel. Hegel is coming to his understanding through his interpretation of Kant. Kant influenced the Romantics. Kant definitely influences Hegel. Hegel's also influenced by the Romantics. And he sees the idea of rationality as reality that is made by the mind. The real is the rational. This is his absolute idealism. Help me explain this a little bit better.
So he rejects the idea of irrationality,
the Romantics,
being necessary for
getting closer to reality.
Okay. The thing itself is unknowable and thus indistinguishable from non-existence. So if it's unknowable, it doesn't exist.
That's where he goes with it. Yeah.
And so he has this idea of his idealism is everything made by the mind. In the Platonic sense, is the real is the rational, and the rational is of the mind. Remember, we're going down into the mind for rationality and up out for irrationality. So
yes.
The real is in the mind, going in the mind. the mind is making the structure of reality. And then irrationality is actually the potential for rationality, but not developed.
It's just not, it's underdeveloped.
It's a potential to become rational. So I guess he's not outright rejecting the idea of the irrational portion of our understanding.
Entirely. He's trying to come up with the synthesis.
But
Yeah.
and I would say kind of accurately too, like the irrational artsy stuff, much like a book like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, is undeveloped potential. Neuromancer talking about what future AIs and stuff, that's irrational, it's art.
Yeah.
But over time we develop these ideas into something more rational. Well, we got freaking AI now, so
We certainly do.
we're not sticking chips in our head to get into the internet
Yet.
yet, but yet.
Yet, but it's coming.
So so I think Hegel's idea was really like, no, like in the Platonic sense, the real is the rational, and what's rational is real. Being and being known, is like, so you are.
There's a deep connection between being and being known. Yes.
Yeah. So as in like.
So this is Platonic.
Yeah, and how real is how knowable. Because, well, and like quite literally, if you don't know about it, it's not real because it doesn't exist, at least within your knowing about it. Like if you've never, I don't know, like you live on a hill, you don't pay attention to the news or anything like that, you don't know about it. It's not real for you.
And not in your experience
So
of reality at the moment.
Well, quite actually, I won't say literally, but actually it's
not a part of your reality.
I could definitely agree with that.
Right.
And
it's not in your reality tunnel.
Yeah. And
that idea is pretty clever. Our rational experience is just that part of our mind that has not yet been fully actualized.
Yeah.
So the mind as an entire system of patterns of intelligibility that we use to structure our experience of reality.
Yeah. And let's use the word realized, because we'll bring it up again instead of
He brings that up,
actualized.
yeah.
But rationality is not fully realized.
There you go.
And the term mind we're using in this case is not the personal mind, but the system of intelligibility. So when we're on this episode, and
That
probably further
mind
episodes,
in general, basically, you could say.
yeah, and it's not like everyone's mind. It's like, no, it's mind as a thing, not like a personal, like not your
the
personal
personal,
mind, but
yeah.
the mind as a thing that makes rational, makes
sense of reality.
through
yeah.
rationality makes sense of reality.
There you go.
Basically.
Through rationality. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the Geist, he comes up with this term Geist, which is kind of like both mind and spirit at once. It overlaps both of those terms to formulate his absolute idealism.
Yeah, that not personal idealism. So the mind not being personalized and the idealism not being personalized, because there is a personal ideal, like the Platonic sense, being the real is the rational and the rational is the real, and everything is made by the mind, that idealism. But he's breaking it out further into the non-personal, absolute,
Yep.
outside idealism of the absolute mind thing. At least that's what I'm understanding out of this.
A general mindedness.
Yeah.
So this is his system of self-realization based off patterns of how we make rational sense of patterns of intelligibility.
Yeah. So the how we make sense of, well, basically the patterns of the world.
So we do this through the understanding of history as well as our current reality to find the patterns, and this is how we can systematically make sense of reality as cultures through the grammars that we develop to make sense of the world.
Yeah.
This is complex, man.
Yeah.
So the patterns that we realize are...
And realizing, so that's another word that we got to talk about, is something we experience, but also...
To realize something you experience, but it's also how things are made real.
Yeah,
realized.
coming into reality.
I realized this story. I realized this novel.
And by looking at history, you can see the moving process, because it's not a stagnant, it's this isn't a stationary, realizing isn't a stationary function. The universe is not a stationary thing. And by looking through history and analyzing history, you can see how it moves, how it changes, how it goes through its phases, its seasons, its rhythms.
So these patterns impress upon us, and we also impress upon the patterns. So this is a reciprocal relationship he's describing. He's seen two processes of differentiation.
Yeah, or two processes, one of them being differentiation.
Oh, well, no, two processes, one of them being differentiation. Yeah. Thank you.
And the the other being integration.
Yeah. So differentiation is making sense, distinguishing things one from another, which helps us to articulate.
So to find the
joints
the
and the division
difference,
points.
Yeah, the differences between things and where. Okay. Yeah, like the joints, the points,
the joints and the points,
and then the process of integration, which is the gathering of things together
into systematic connections.
Yeah, so it becomes what's the word? Systemization is what we'll call this. Using differentiation and integration in a system.
Yes, because we are participants through our behavior and our ways of living in the world.
Yeah.
So we can integrate these realizations. So that is the integration and the differentiation is the process of systemization, wherein confused things that were fused together mistakenly, can get pulled apart and reframed.
Yeah,
and understood
and
better.
then reintegrated back together.
Reintegrated, yeah. So living systems.
Yeah. So the system.
So he describes reality as a living system articulated by differentiation and integration.
Yeah. So system
in a systematic way.
Yeah, and the system improvements through realization progression. Like your realization progresses, and then you come to the point of okay, and then you do it again. That's the living system. It's a living, growing, progressing thing, and
right.
by using history, you can see that living, growing.
It's a living thing
progression.
Because it's reproducing.
Yeah.
And it's getting increased resolution over time. It's getting better and better handle of the complex patterns and relations through being in the world.
Yeah, and the world being unto us as well.
Yes.
So it's like one being in the world, and then the world being right back onto you.
Yeah. So this is the process of dialectic as he sees it.
Yeah.
The two ideas draw together.
Well,
they form a higher integration, a synthesis, and then that makes a new idea.
Well, not just
that can then produce
not just two ideas, but an idea and then the anti-idea.
And the anti-idea. You're
not
right,
just an adjacent idea, but like complete antithesis of the idea.
That's right.
And then, and then
yes, because every single idea that's proposed is then contrasted and distinguished. From a counter idea.
Yeah.
Then those two ideas are drawn together into higher integration.
Yeah. And you start the process again and keep doing it. Yeah. And that whole process of doing it again and again and again is the dialectic process, which
I dig this alternate definition of dialectic he's given humanity here. I like what he's going for.
But I
appreciate that.
The one thing is where I'll have to argue with Hegel on this. I don't think the most efficient nor a usable method of coming, creating something better or coming to a greater understanding of something can just be like, well, I have this idea. Okay, well, let me just, shoot the other. It's like, okay, we're in the desert, right? And I'm like, hey, we need water. And you're like, well, no, man, we're fine. We don't need water. We've got a cup. It's good. We already have water. Like, the opposite idea is we don't need water. And it's just like, okay, well, we're going to die of thirst here real quick if we don't get water. I know that's a really bad...
very simplistic.
Yeah, very simplistic, but you could expand it to, look at, capitalism versus socialism. So, and we'll use those terms, but what I really mean is private ownership of the means of production and capital and things, and then public ownership, as in everybody owns it. Which are the opposites.
With the central
the individual and
body,
everybody.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but one actually does good for people. People fall along the way, and then, the other one is everybody owning everything, and that's just not possible.
Yeah.
So the opposite idea doesn't work either, because then it's just like, then there's no ownership, and there's really no space in between.
then nobody gets anything.
Because everybody, like even communities, they share their personal space, their personal time, they share their personal fruits of their labor. They're personal. It doesn't just already belong to everybody. That's in my mind a no-go concept that just doesn't work.
Sure.
You know, like
it can't. There's not enough.
You can have public spaces.
If not everybody is working very, very hard, there's not enough for everybody. And in a world with finite resources, there isn't enough. If you try and force everybody into the same standard of living, you're going to have to hurt a lot of people to do that.
Well, yeah.
Unless you try and lift people up.
But
if you find a way to lift people up to a level instead of lowering everybody to the same level.
That's where the private ownership...
But it's hard to figure out where the caps and the cutoffs here, because we know that we've definitely got rampant greed in our country, but we have crony version of capitalism running in this country. We only have not a true free market
not even to get into
corrupted...
all that, but just the simple idea of being able to own your own stuff, and have this concept of like, this is mine, and the concept of, oh no, this is everybody's. Those are completely two different concepts, and you're not going to find any, by fusing the two, you're
not going to find the synthesis between those two.
Yeah, they don't synthesize because there's no, it's really, it's hard to explain it. That's
we need a better example.
Basically, one can get you water, and it's your water, and the other one is, oh, we don't need water because you got a cup of water, and I'll drink from your cup of water. It's like, yeah, but we're both going to die.
But this cup isn't infinite. Yeah.
Yeah, but this cup isn't infinite. And the other thing is people, when they have personal stake in something, like, that's mine. They treat it better when it's not yours. And that's, I guess, the problem, what we do with nature. Like, if you want to say one thing is, we don't realize that, yes, this is actually ours in the sense of it's our responsibility, our thing to nurture and care for, not, well, it's everybody, so, just, I don't know, let it grow out of control, or don't deal with it, or gobble it all up to give it, or plow it under to feed everybody, or this, no, it's personally, like, it's yours. The planet is yours. You are the planet's.
Yeah.
Or here's a better way, instead of economic systems, marriage.
Okay. You
got two people together, right? I'm saying that's actually really good for a family and good for the two people. It's a marriage of two people. He is hers and her is he's, or,
she is his, yeah.
She is his, or, his is his, but that's getting too confusing. So they belong to each other. My wife, my husband, right? The other one, it says, oh, no wives, no husbands. Everybody belongs to everybody. Yeah. How well did that work out? It didn't work out very well. We tried it with the whole free love movement and all that stuff.
Yeah, people are still trying it now.
Yeah, and this whole idea of not having committed relationships is making people unhealthy. There's no in between ground.
Unhappy, unfulfilled.
Sometimes there's things that work.
Kids don't have a.
And my biggest argument with the
always have a consistent parenting situation that they can.
Because I can agree with being able to find where things are different. Like the differentiations between things, like this thing is this thing and this thing is this thing, and then
it seems most people
see how they work together.
Yeah,
and integration, the systemization of the two, I can see that. But the idea that you have an idea and then it's contrasting opposite when I'm looking at an engine, I'm not looking at contrasting opposites. I'm looking at things working together in a system. When I'm looking at a relationship of people, I'm looking at things that work into a system, not the opposite. So there's relationship and then no relationship. And just getting with people is a relationship. So there is no relationship. So what the hell are you talking about? That's where the dialectic breaks down. These are extreme ends of it. There's other places where you can kind of dabble in it. If you have to do I want to put this here, or do I want to put this here? Or do I want to put this here, or do I want to, paint this wall black, or do I want to paint it white? You'll be like, okay, I'll put up one and then I'll look up the other, and I'll see.
I mean, it's the rest of what he's trying to say is seems a great idea on the surface, and there's a lot of good that can be done with it. The idea that you can take an idea. This is hilarious how we have to talk about this. Any idea can be proposed, then it can be contrasted and distinguished from its counter. And then if those two are brought into conversation and healthy competition, we can realize, those two ideas can be drawn together into higher integration or understanding, and then we can integrate a new idea from that. This is a decent goal that he's going for here.
But
it just does have
everything
places
have a
where
counter,
it fails.
though?
Well, just wait. You haven't even heard.
Well, I know
the really good critiques that are coming up. There's
I just want
powerful critiques that are clear that Vervaeke can help us make. Here.
I guess it's the antithesis being not everything has a counter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, white and black, yeah, they're counters, but you know, what about like blue?
Well, you're right, because
we're
talking about subjective things a lot of the time. So when it's objective stuff, it's a little bit easier for us to compare and contrast and find synthesis.
Well, you know, the Earth and the Moon, they're not counters; they're in a that symbiotic relationship. So it's like, what's the opposite of a planet? Not
Space.
Planet. Yeah, but like this, but that's like, you know,
it's
you could have
moon.
nebula, and nebula, if you look at it far enough, has stuff in there, so it's not space, but it's really just space. So like, what's the opposite of a lot of things? I guess it's the framing of how this attempted psychotechnology is working has like a busted leg, and if you don't stand too far onto the antithesis end, you can work with it. But if you go into the antithesis end for things that don't really have,
basically not everything can synthesize. There's got to be another solution. Not everything could be synthesized together.
Yeah, like this.
Right. So,
yeah, sorry I had to get that out there, because this is one of those things that just makes my brain go like,
No, this is tricky for me too, and this is why we're viewing this series, and we're gaining insight through the help of Vervaeke, who has spent his life along with others. Serious professionals trying to understand this and break it down, and building on top of minds for hundreds and thousands of years, who have been trying to find ways for human beings to get along better with one another and our environments. So let's see where he takes us here now, because part of your challenge to this idea is going to be brought in, and he's going to take us. And
I won't even say it's like a challenge, because I don't think I'm tall enough of a giant to stand up and.
Well, it's a question. It's like, how does this work then? You know, what about things that can't be synthesized?
Yeah, that's what breaks my brain, is because like I'm having trouble. I'm like, there's so many things that can't have the antithesis. There's not like an antithesis to it, so it's that breaks my brain.
I like the intention of the idea here of trying to synthesize different ideas, you know, into a new one by contrasting them together and distinguishing them from one another, to start a new integrative process over and over and over and over and over again. Sure,
but I think the valuable part, though, is this the process of differentiation and the process of integration, though, because to differentiate, you're finding, you know, the spaces between things where they separate and they break down, so you know what all the composite pieces are, and then you put it together. It's like working on an engine. You have to figure out, okay, well, all this and all this, actually this bit of tubing and all that stuff goes with this thing, and then this goes with this over here, and then this goes with here, and integrate it all together and be like,
and then systematize it.
So it's not, you know,
so it can be done over again.
The core of
what he's saying is
the
accurate.
Dialectic is, like, in this sense, is.
But it raises a new series of problems as we find that the further humanity gets along in history, every time we come up with what we think is a solution, it creates a whole new host of problems.
Well, and that's just the universe. That's science and everything too. It's like, once you come up with a theory, the reason why you put it out there in the world is so people can find the holes in it to make it better.
Right.
You know. And that's not finding the antitheses in it. It's finding out what doesn't work.
Yeah.
Kind of what I'm doing right here. I'm just like, this doesn't work.
So let's see what happens now. I'm going to jump back in here now, guys. I'm going to pull him back a little bit too, actually. Let's do that.
Of trying to understand reality. Okay? And it ultimately goes back to Plato. And we use math to talk about this, and we use experiments to talk about this, and so forth. Okay, so this is not a ridiculous idea that Hegel has. It's a profound idea. You can see it at work. And if you talk about something, to use, I think, a strong analogy, about how science is progressing, and something about the patterns that science discovers are also the patterns of reality, then you have something strongly analogous to how Hegel is thinking of Geist. So this dialectic, even the term that Hegel uses, by the way, this is inspired by Plato, although I think Hegel's interpretation of dialectic is very different from Plato's. But this whole process of the way in which Geist is historically developing is a process of self-transcendence on Geist's part, emergence. It's the way in which Geist is developing, self-actualizing, the way in which it is moving from a more and more irrational making sense to a more and more rational, systematic making sense. So Hegel proposes that in the history of dialectic, we can get to a stage where the system of understanding and realization becomes aware of itself, that one of the things, one of the ideas, one of the systems of making sense that emerges is this idea itself. And you see what that means? And there's hubris in Hegel here, right? Because what Hegel's basically saying is his philosophy is the philosophy in which this process of Geist and realization has become reflectively aware of it, in which this process has created a systematic understanding that grasps the dialectical principles of Geist. When you get that, then you have what he calls, right, absolute spirit, absolute Geist. There's this telos, there's this goal in this whole process. All of history is moving, and of course, he now sees himself as the discoverer of this, but all of history is moving to this moment of absolute idealism. So rationality is seen as a systematic process in the self-development of Geist, of its self-understanding. Now, many of you are probably finding that this is a very impersonal way of talking about mind and meaning, and we will come back to that. So hold on to that. We will come back to that. So when the process of making sense, of understanding, passes into this stage of self-understanding, when the process creates systems of ideas that grasp this pattern of dialectic, then Hegel says that what's happened is we have moved from understanding with a capital U, because it's not individual understanding, but the understanding in Geist, to reason with a capital R. Right? So, what does he mean by that? The principles of rationally making sense, this living system of principles for rationally making sense, moves from understanding things to understanding everything systematically. All the things are getting integrated into a systematic understanding, and that systematic understanding is now self-reflective. It includes and refers and grasps itself. In a very deep sense, rationality has realized itself. It's a very powerful way of thinking. Now put this all together with the original and crucial premise of idealism. Right? If this is a process by which reality realizes itself, and the real is the rational, this is also a process by which reality realizes itself. Right? This process at work in and through us, and in and through history, by which reality and rationality have, right, realized themselves, is God. You see what Hegel's done? He's taken, again, as I've mentioned, this, right, Hebrew Christian idea that God is right? That process by which we make sense and we develop and create the world with God, and he has created a philosophical understanding of that, and had translated that religious way of talking about history into a completely secular philosophical way of talking about history. He has secularized and rationalized the Hebraic heritage. Now this is important, right? Because this God is, in many senses, right, a secularized, non-religious God. This is not a God that is, right, intervening in history through prophets. This is a God who has been realized through the reflective actions, the contemplation of a philosopher, Hegel. Hegel understood his project in very religious terms. But, and this is a very important but, he was always translating those religious terms into philosophical, conceptual terms of rational development. He would consistently take the religious terms and go through this kind of translation, this kind of exposition and explication and explanation that would transform them into philosophical, conceptual theories of how rationality, intelligibility, and reality have co-developed together. So, I'm going to read you a quote from the earliest system program of German idealism. He states the following, quote, "Here I shall discuss an idea which, as far as I know, has not occurred to anyone else. We must have a new mythology." Notice the word he's using. Notice he's using that word in a way that resonates how we've been using the word mythology in this lecture series. We must have a new mythology, but this mythology must be in the service of the ideas. Notice that language. It must be in the service of the ideas. It must be a mythology of reason, capital R, reason. It must be about this. He goes on to say, quote, "In the end, enlightened and unenlightened must clasp hands," right? The philosophical and the mythological, the enlightened and the unenlightened. And notice the language, enlightened, right? Must clasp hands. Mythology must become philosophy in order to make the people rational, and philosophy must become mythological in order to make in order to make philosophers sensible. Notice that this is simultaneously a philosophical proposal and a social cultural program for how to transform religion, people, and the role of philosophy within that transformation. He then goes on to say that this will lead to a, quote, "higher spirit sent from heaven must found the new religion," right, among us. "It will be the last and greatest work of mankind." This is the final utopia. This is the culmination. This will be the last religion. This will be the last thing, because all of this results in this final stage in which Geist, this living system of patterns of intelligibility and how reality itself is structured, has generated a systematic self-understanding, and we grasp all of our previous cultural and intellectual history. I want to show you how Hegel does this in a specific example. This translation between mythology and philosophy to create the new religion that is beyond, right, all other religions. So let's think of the process by which understanding, right, is moving to reason, And you can see that, right, that's directly parallel to the process by which mythology is moving to philosophy. So let's get an example of a very important mythological structure. And of course, I'm going to take Christianity because, as I tried to show you, Hegel is secularizing Christianity in many ways. So Hegel argues that, right, let's put the myth on this side, and then the philosophy on this side, right? And we're going to see how we go from making sense of things to this self-realization, participating in the system that grasps the systematicity of this whole process. So you have the Father in the Trinity. Well, what does the Father represent? Well, the Father represents, Hegel would argue, understanding is undifferentiated, unarticulated, unactualized. Unarticulated, unactualized, right? Undifferentiated. Okay. And then, of course, the idea is you get the incarnation in the Son. Sorry, that should be capitalized. I don't mean any disrespect. Right? Now, the incarnation is how our understanding starts to get differentiated into particular things. Here's a table, here's a cup, right? I'm here, the world's over there. We get all this articulation. So you get the beginning of, right, articulation into particular things. And so you can see there's a sense in which, right, the Son is the counter, the antithesis of the Father, right? But then you get, right, the reconciliation of the Son to the Father. You know, the Son is sacrificed, and the Son reconciles with the Father. And that, of course, is, right, that moment of higher integration. A higher new kind of identity is created. So this corresponds to the realization, again, trying to pick up on both meanings of this term, the realization of the identity in difference of the Father in Son. So the Father and Son are both different and one, and that's how understanding is now moving to this process where the integration and the differentiation are being brought together. Understanding is realizing that understanding is made out of differentiation and integration. And there's a kind of reconciliation, a higher order self-awareness that is taking place. And then we finally move down here, right, to the Holy Spirit. And of course, there's a bit of a pun intended because that's, you know, Geist is one way of translating spirit. And this is what? What did we see in the New Testament? We ultimately get the idea that God is agape. God is identical to the very process by which we are making each other into persons. And we don't individually possess agape in our minds. Agape is something we dwell within, a process of making sense and making persons and making community of persons. And of course, what does the Holy Spirit corresponds to? Well, this is Geist dwelling within its self-awareness. God has always been agape. We just didn't realize it. God is dwelling within the development of the community. This is what Hegel's doing. This is why Hegel has been called the Thomas Aquinas of Protestantism. He's doing, right, in Germany, post the Protestant Reformation, what Aquinas was doing when, right, if you remember, when European thought, the systems of European thought encountered Aristotelian science. Hegel is now taking, right, all of the machinery, right, the theological machinery that he sees at work in myth, and he is integrating it with the philosophical and scientific understanding that is impacting so powerfully on Europe in his time. He's trying to deal with how to restructure Christianity in light of the scientific revolution, the Protestant Reformation. And this is what he's doing. And he creates this powerful system. It's this just tremendously powerful system. This grand synthesis. And that's important because Hegel felt, and like I said, there's an element of hubris in here, but that his system exemplified what it was talking about. His philosophical system, in the way it provided a total, pay attention to that word, a total explanation of reality, mind, being, God, religion, philosophy, history. He thought it exemplified it, demonstrated it. And so German idealism was just massively influential because of this grand synthesis that it offered. But you can see what's going on here, right? You can see that this is a very powerful attempt to try and save the meaning-making machinery and salvage the axial legacy and somehow give us an account of, right, how we can still develop an increasing contact with reality in a way that is ultimately spiritual and rational at the same time. Hegel is in many ways a titanic figure trying to provide a powerful grammar, philosophical set of, concepts, conceptual vocabulary, and theoretical, theoretical principles for structuring that vocabulary. He's trying to create a grammar by which we can deeply respond to the meaning crisis. So he's enormously popular.
Okay, so we're getting a better understanding of what Hegel was trying to pull off here. And then after this point, we're going to get into the very powerful rebuttals that come against him, because there's an alternative explanation to his explanation that comes along that's even more secular. And Marx jumps on it. It has his own disagreements as well, so we're going to get into that a little bit. He's saving Marx for the next episode, I believe.
So this dialectic process is the way in which the Geist is self-realizing from irrationality into rationality.
Yes.
In a nutshell.
Yes, that's well said.
And that was him saying that. I just wrote it down, but I condensed it. There's this process of going from irrationality into rationality. And that's how it the Geist realizes itself, is that process of moving
from irrationality into rationality.
And he thought that his dialectic system was the way. The system can be aware. Oh yeah,
the system becomes aware of itself.
The hubris of this man.
His hubris is pretty impressive, man. Yeah, this guy is really big on himself here.
Oh man,
so I did it. I actually am the one that discovered this.
Yes, and it will create the ultimate Geist, the ultimate spirit. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like he saw himself as like awakening the true God or something.
Well, and
This is
it's
really,
it's almost like, like he feels like he's, like everything's moving towards this realization, and he was able to articulate it and put this thing out
and
there.
what, I
And,
mean, and what he did was, it's very, very powerful. Vervaeke's right. It certainly was powerful. It's sticky, and it stuck around to this day because it provides a total alternative to the previous religious perspective on this. And he's literally just taken a bunch of religious terminology and found a way to secularize it.
yeah. So, yeah. So
but you're still having to use terms like Geist, and this thing that realizes itself, and it's really interesting.
yeah. So the living system of things, self-reflecting, moving from understanding into capital R reason. And, rationality has realized itself. Reality has, realized itself. The system is God.
Yeah, and
just like,
it's kind of funny because maybe that is he's actually breaking down like kind of what is happening as God, the process of love by which we create persons,
but
unfolds itself in reality. But he's trying to come up with a secular kind of alternative here.
It's almost like he's copying the Hebrew, the Hebrew's homework and trying to change it up to pass it off as his. Like that's
it's a guy that is trying to help solve the problems of his day.
Not gonna fault him for that, but like
he's translating religious ideas, and he makes an obvious point of this, that he's translating religious ideas into philosophical theories of how rationality and reality co-develop together. So he's trying to develop a new mythology,
without the necessity for a myth.
Well,
or without, I guess, without the myth being a divine thing, or
it's a different. It's funny because it's still religious at its core,
but the God isn't religious. That's the thing.
But he's trying to take the religion out of it somehow. It's weird what he's trying to do, but he's trying. He wants to try and find a way to help the people of his day find some stability in their understanding of reality, and he thinks he's getting somewhere, and to some extent he is in some ways, recognizing some really interesting connections into how we do make sense of reality. That's really interesting, the way that he recognizes the value of myth. We must have a new mythology. It must be in service of the ideas. And Vervaeke does a great job of pointing out all the religiously themed language that he's using here without realizing it.
Yeah, and it must be about reason, capital R, reason. And the enlightened and an unenlightened must clasp hands, and accept it. Everybody must accept this. Myth must be philosophy, and philosophy must be myth, and all these counter things that, like, halfway intelligent guys in college used to woo girls, or at least used to say stuff that sounds cool but really is just backwards. The mythology must become the philosophy, and philosophy must become the mythology, and the philosopher can only it's just like, dude, he was drinking his own tea or his own Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Well, he was involved in the German idealism of his time. And he's trying to find a total explanation for reality that is an alternative that the German idealists of his time will support.
And I think maybe his biggest downfall here is the idea that this is going to be the last greatest creation of man. And it's just like, well, then that just gives you an endpoint, so it's self-defeating by its nature.
This is it. Humans have achieved it now. It's just the perfect utopia.
Or if we can do this,
is the dangerous utopia. The idea of utopia coming into play,
and also the idea that you can have a perfect grasp of history too is
he is attempting to salvage the axial legacy.
Sure.
He's trying to do something good. We got to give him credit here, but once again, so many times as we've noticed throughout the series, is that human beings trying to do something with good intentions don't recognize the various different ways things can play out, and how can you in such
the worst things can come from the worst things can come from the best intentions.
Yeah. Yeah, so we would certainly get humbled
Wizard
throughout this
style,
process, and I think the ultimate reminder here is that we should really like try and remain humbled as human beings, and not take part in such extreme hubris as this.
Yeah, what did we talk about? That's psychological certainty, which is bigotry.
Mm-hmm.
So he's
playing in that territory here. Oh yeah, and he's the special person that discovered this too. He wants some credit for his ego, you know.
Yeah. So what he did with the Hebrewic story of, I guess Hebrewic into Christian, because the Father, the Son, and then the Holy Spirit, which is, the Father would be the integration side that is undifferentiated, unactualized, unarticulated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the Son, which is the articulated, particular individual. And the Son sacrificed, and so I guess in his mind, the
reconciliation, the reuniting, awakens like the Geist, basically, for him. Instead of it being the Holy Spirit that lives through God's love, it's the Geist dwelling within its self-awareness becomes aware of itself.
Yeah, and so like the differentiation end of this, the articulation end of this, you sacrifice that once you figured out the differences, you sacrifice that and fuse it back together with integration, thus sacrificing the deintegration, and that synthesis, using his words, the Son or the Holy Spirit, that's the synthesis end, and it just continues and continues and continues and continues. So he's like rebuilt the Holy Trinity, but took the God,
he's taken God out of it.
Yeah, and took the myth out of it and made it a philosophical
he's not recognizing the use of mythology here in and of itself.
Well, I don't think like what Vervaeke was saying about agape and that what you dwell within, he's leaving that out. And so he thought that the spirit is dwelling within its self-awareness. The Geist is aware of itself and it's just dwelling within itself, and
it can do that now because it's recognized.
Yeah,
it can articulate particular things now that there's the Son, and the Son is sacrificed. It reconciles, reunites with the Father. Then you get this realization of identity and difference between Father and Son. So now the Geist is starting to kind of wake up to the different things in reality, and its awareness. And so now it's dwelling in its self-awareness. This is like the end of religion, or the ultimate religion for him.
Yeah, it's the grand synthesis.
Yeah,
but he. In his theories, there is no caring for love and making persons out of people. Now there's, like in later iterations, when we come to like, communism and other terrible things like that, there is the guise of we're doing it for the people. It's all, for the people, looking out for people, but it's the people, not a person.
Yeah.
You can actually see it in like Soviet era art too. Like everybody kind of done into this blocky thing, and they all somewhat look the same. And they've got
just this homogeneous blob.
Yeah,
that everyone's a part of.
Actually, the new Soviet era art that we have in this country, that's like advertising and stuff, is like weird, abnormally large bodies and tiny heads with like big hands and big legs, and really like juvenilely drawn. You'll start seeing it now. I'll point one out to you, and you'll start seeing it everywhere.
With the old art from the Soviet era too, and I've been seeing it come around for the last several years.
It's just turned into like this really bad kindergarten drawing type, but it's still depersonalizing it, making everybody just like a collection of features that are just interchangeable.
Oh yeah, the depth of the individual is not. And the head is
small too. So that there's some symbology in there. The head is always small. It's like they don't want you thinking. They just want you buying stuff and flailing and having that person and just the whatever they put in there.
Neo-Marxism.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's weird, man.
Yeah, we're gonna get deep into this postmodernism and the Marxism. It's all coming, guys.
Real quick, I want to bring up, just like run this past you, and just as an idea, like you could take this Father, Son, Holy Spirit Trinity, and like, if you were to take all of it out and have like, the Father being the state, and by state I mean the definition is the everybody the what represents the everybody, the undifferentiated, unarticulated everybody, and then the son is the individual, which must be sacrificed in order to have this identity realization of the individual being sacrificed for the group of the whole,
The
in that
Geist, which is
relation.
the community. Yeah.
And
you nailed
that
it.
explains communism
You'll see
and
how this
fascism.
came along.
And, it's
You'll
like,
see
boy.
how it all rattled out from here. So,
And this is also like I've read and listened to other writings, particularly by Hegel and other people that have talked about Hegel.
Hegel's
So this
synthesis
is
work is the question, and we can look at current history, human history. Has it gotten better? Is it getting worse? Is it stable?
and it's
very
it's
unstable.
totalistic.
It seems
in
that we
a
haven't
sense.
solved this problem yet. Yeah.
And it's like, well, the totality of the universe is within this theory, so it covers everything.
Oh yeah,
And it's just
this
like,
is
dude,
absolutely it. Absolute idealism, and it covers everything. This is
But
the perfect synthesis.
to give the devil his credit,
Too much certainty.
Well, the devil his due, if you will, and give Hegel his credit. He was attempting to salvage the axial machinery.
Yeah, I don't think he was
the machinery we used to use.
I don't think he was an acting devil by any means. Like aware, like trying to do.
Oh no, yeah, no. And by devil is due, it's just more like
he was just trapped in his times.
But it's
he did the best with what he had.
But the devil in us all is the one that tells us we're right and we should feel good about
the
it.
Hubris,
Yeah.
Because
some of the greatest minds were some of the most icky people.
Sometimes, certainly,
and
always, all
sometimes-
humans are flawed individuals. So
Yeah.
when you see great people, like great human beings, and then people point out the flaws of those great people to try and take away from the great things they did.
Diogenes was a mighty thinker,
Everyone's
but
flawed.
he was also a public masturbator. So it's like,
Yeah, right.
gross, inappropriate.
Yeah, it
But,
might have just been one time that he did that, though. He was
Yeah,
trying to
but
make
still,
a point.
it only
He was
takes
like, "You guys
takes one time.
think I'm doing something inappropriate here. You're the ones that are all lying, cheating, and stealing
Yeah,
here,
man.
and doing dishonest deeds in the market."
Yeah. All right. So, Hegel's attempt to basically doing what we're doing now in this age with all of this, but let's not cast our shadows on what we're trying to do in the future, because that seems like to be the recurring theme for everything. Like our perception of reality and God is at risk of being tainted by our shadow.
Yes. Our certainty, our drawing strong borders around our conceptions of reality,
Yeah.
and refusing to budge on those is very, very, very dangerous. We're going to butt up against other people's ideas, and we're going to go to war over them. We've got to keep our ideas open-ended and let them continue to conversate and upgrade one another. And I like the idea of the synthesis, but you didn't come up with the total theory. We never will, you could say, as far as how humans should best operate together. It's always going to have to change depending on environment and conditions.
Yeah, and, being careful not to...
There's optimizing ways to improve our relations, but we're always going to have room to improve. I think we should keep that open.
Yeah, and I guess, being careful not to do bad things with a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Right? Very easy to do.
Yeah, because, the good idea here...
You get so certain.
The good idea here is integration and differentiation, and being able to tell the difference between things, the difference between me and this pen and this piece of paper and me and you is kind of important for reasoning. But then this all integrated together is us taking notes on a lecture, on a
learning,
podcast.
Talking about it. Yeah.
And that's the integration. And that's a good thing with
that's a true thing that happens.
But this idea that, you can
this
take a thing in its opposite
but this is
and have
all
them conflicting.
Yeah,
and
to
this
say
will
that
create...
this is all there is to reality, and that there might... we don't know if there is not some sacred, divine will behind all of this process of differentiation, integration, and systemization.
The Father and the Son aren't...
They're trying to remove it to marry it with a more secular world, but what if there is no political solution and there is no certain religious solution?
Maybe
but there is a way of being. There's a middle path.
They should all do their own thing and work in harmony with each other, opposed to against, or them just trying to do either or, trying to do all of it.
Right. Yeah, because it's all like two sides of the same coin over and over and over again.
Yeah. So the Father and the Son are not opposites. It's like that. This is another thing where it breaks down here. You could say that, yes, the Father would represent the undifferentiated and the Son represents the differentiated, but they're not opposites. It's the Father was a Son once.
Yeah,
And
but
the
it's not
Son-
just opposites.
and the
It's
Son will
also
become-
it could also just be a counter idea, an alternative, an opposing anything that's different. And all he's trying to do is break down the structure of reality and how humans understand it. And so he's trying to say
I don't
that
think
the breakdown from Father to Son is the articulation of particular things. I see what he's trying to say. This is how God woke up. First, there was just God. And it was undifferentiated. It didn't know itself until it had the Son. And then the Son sacrifices itself. And through that whole process, it becomes self-aware. That's what he's trying to trace the process of God, but do it in a secular way.
and also
Of God's awakening.
Yeah, and
of
I
God's
think
growth. And who knows if God even did go through this process. It could have always, it could be more that Alpha,
he was
Omega, omnipresent, always has known.
he was a
knows?
hermeticist as well, I believe.
This is just his view of it.
There's this idea of
it's intriguing, and it's useful because he does trace how we develop and form ideas and synthesize things that are different, but that's about as far as it goes. And I think you're right. You can't synthesize everything exactly the way that he's trying to force things.
Yeah.
To fit his view.
Yeah.
To fit this idea that he's pushing, but it's an extremely powerful idea because in practice it can be used to do a lot in the world.
So
and
there's no way to split a triangle into like itself, like basically split itself in half yet still retain the same shape. The only way you can really do that, because you'll end up with like two right angles, or any way you cut it, two right angle triangles. The only way to cut a triangle and still maintain triangle is with three. That's where it breaks down too, because it's not just either and then or, but it's either or and both and more than that, opposed to things on separate sides of a column. It's everything together and
and even if you can come up with secular alternatives for the whole Trinity concept, which is not just in Christianity, it's all in religions around the world. There's something about that three process and the cosmos and the universe and how it makes itself. Even if you can find an accurate thing that is that's a representation for that in the secular view of reality, that doesn't prove that a divine source doesn't exist still. But this is a different argument, and that Vervaeke is about to give us a challenge to Hegel that comes from even more secular view than his own, and it's pretty damning, and you'll see why here. Let's go ahead and jump on in here, guys, and we're going to go ahead and let it flow out to the end, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion at the end here. Let me get us back on it.
Just doing some haggling with Hegel.
Haggling with the Hegel.
Respond.
Wow. Okay.
Theoretical principles for structuring that vocabulary and create a grammar by which we can deeply respond to the meaning crisis. So he's enormously popular. And as I said, this form of German idealism spreads across Europe. Very powerful ways, deeply influential. You'll even see figures within America, like Josiah Royce, early on in the intellectual history of America, deeply influenced by Hegel. So, why is this important? Well, Hegel is just going to have a profound impact on any future attempts to try and respond to the meaning crisis, just because of the way he's trying to synthesize everything together. But what's more important is, for many people, this form of idealism, German idealism, has completely collapsed. It's no longer considered a viable position. Now, I'm not here to argue about this at sort of an abstract philosophical level, right? Because of course, there are many defenders of Hegel today. I want to take a look at what has happened, right, in the critical response to Hegel and how that has infused the development and the intensification of the meaning crisis. Remember, Hegel sets up this pattern of secularizing religion into systems of ideas that attempt to give us a total explanation and guide. He's the godfather, in this sense, of totalitarian ideologies. So, you have three main avenues of seeing a response. We already did one. The person who has a deep critique of Hegel is Schopenhauer, and as you remember, Schopenhauer understands the relationship not the way Hegel does in terms of reason. Schopenhauer understands it in terms of will, the will to live, and then Nietzsche takes that up as the will to power, and he tries to use that as a way of recapturing, self-transcendence. So we've already talked about that, so I'm not going to go over that again, but please remember it, So the fact that the aspect of will and the will to live and the will to power wasn't adequately being addressed was what Schopenhauer points to. Okay, and then we have, of course, the tremendous critique of Kierkegaard. All right? Kierkegaard famously said, Hegel made a system and then sat down beside it. And what's he pointing out here? There's an impersonalism, there's a lack of perspectival and participatory knowing in Hegel's whole proposal. It has been rendered into a system of ideas. All of this, all of this connectedness to reality, to ourselves and to each other, all of the process by which we cultivate wisdom and self-transcendence has been rendered into a system of beliefs, a system of ideas. Perspectival and participatory knowing have been lost. The only participation we have is in our understanding and appreciation of the Hegelian system. Now, what does that mean? Kierkegaard is pointing out, I believe, to the idea that our attempt to make contact with what's most real, our attempt to realize the divine, like in Platonic anagoge, and Plato's dialectic was linked deeply to anagoge, has been completely severed from personal transformation and self-transcendence. You do not have to undergo any radical change. You do not have to have mystical experience. You do not have to have a higher state of consciousness. You do not have to have encountered a Socratic challenge. Theology has become completely conceptual, propositional, rational self-reflection. It is not in any way engaged with projects of transformative experience. Westphal, in his book, Transcendence and Self-Transcendence, echoes this critique and points out that while Hegel is proposing this tremendous epistemic self-transcendence, we come to know how we know, he has lost the deep connection you saw in Plato to what Westphal, I'm not quite happy with this term, but he calls it like ethical self-transcendence. This is the process by which we become radically different. We overcome our egocentrism. We become more capable of agapic love. And Kierkegaard points out, I think quite correctly, that when we move through those transformative experiences, it requires what he would call a leap of faith. And this is a very dangerous concept, and I'm not going to try and defend it. But I think this makes sense given what we've already seen in the work of L.A. Paul and others, that going through these transformative experiences is not something you can reason your way through. We exist before we have discovered this essence about who and what we are. That's the whole point of existentialism, as I mentioned. So what Kierkegaard is pointing out is that this system, for all of its grandeur, is in a very deep sense like what Socrates found with the original natural philosophers. It is profound truths that have no existential transformative relevance. You cannot find in Hegel how to cultivate wisdom. You can only find a theoretical structure for interpreting history. What about Marx? Marx is the other great critic of Hegel. And I hope you're seeing a pattern here. What's missing is the connection to will, right? Our participatory perspectival involvement. What's missing here is the connection to transformative experience, to ethical self-transcendence. What's missing here, according to Marx? Well, what Marx is basically arguing, again, Marx, I'm like, my God, you know, the titanic things we're talking about here. And there's all these aspects of Marx I can't touch on, like his whole economic critique, and that's not what I'm trying to do here. Marx is basically saying, right, that history is not driven by, think of Plato, think of the man and the lion and the monster. History is not driven by reason, by the man. History is driven by the monster, right? It's driven by our socioeconomic activity as we try to provide for our material existence. So Marx was, of course, deeply influenced also by Vervaeke, which means fire stream, which is a great name. And Marx says, you can't understand me unless you have passed through the fire stream of Feuerbach's work. Feuerbach made this proposal that contrary to Hegel, that religion is not the arena in which Geist has been unfolding itself and reality and intelligibility have been co-developing. Instead, he argues that religion is a projection, a term, of course, that Freud and Jung are going to pick up on. That when I'm thinking about God, what I'm actually doing is projecting an ideal model of my own humanity. And Feuerbach's idea is that this projection distorts and distracts us, deludes us, and it ultimately alienates human beings from their own role within historical processes. So Marx is going to take up this idea, this critique of religion, and he's going to see religion not as Hegel does, as the vessel and vehicle in which Geist is unfolding itself. He's going to see religion as a noxious projection that is actually deluding people and distracting them from how they are the authors of history. So what Marx does is he says, okay, once we get rid of the religious distortion and we shift to the material monster, we see the dialectic at work there. The dialectic is a dialectical materialism, not a dialectical idealism. Right? So the clash is not between ideas that are contrasting and integrating. The clash is a process of political struggle between opposing ways of socioeconomic life. We have different classes, that's what a class is, a socioeconomic way of life, that oppose the idea of this distinction and articulation has been turned into one of conflict between these classes. But these classes are nevertheless systematically related. They are interdependent. They rely and define each other. So history is a dialectic that is constantly through these conflict, the political struggle between the classes, is working out the self-contradictions in socioeconomic life. This is the core of Marx's critique of capitalism, that it contains all these inherent self-contradictions. And that this process of political struggle and violence, will work out the self-contradictions in our socioeconomic activity until we achieve a political state of peace and freedom, the promised land. Always the attempt to find the promised land. So what has Marx done? Do you see he's actually, in a sense, completing? I'm not trying to justify, I'm just saying he's developing and bringing to a kind of logical conclusion the secularization implicit in Hegel. And he's supplying, I have criticisms of this being an adequate solution, but this is what he sees himself doing. He sees himself supplying the missing participation that we don't have in Hegel. How do you participate in Hegel? Well, Marx says this is how you participate. A call to arms. Right? You know, the philosophers have only talked about the world, right? The communists want to change it. That's the Communist Manifesto, right? Workers of the world unite. We have nothing to lose but our chains. The idea is the dialectic and participation come together in the idea of political, socioeconomic revolution. And you can also see elements of will here. Violent ideologies. Violent, totalizing ideologies that promise a secular utopia that is the culmination of the internal logic of history. So you have this deep politicalization of the process by which people are supposed to try and have faith, sense the course of history, participate in the kairos. You see, the kairos of Christianity has become the revolution, the turning point in history that you have to participate in. You have to be on the right side. You have to help bring about the utopia. So these three critiques all push. This is, of course, pushing towards existentialism. This is a religious kind of existentialism. This, through Nietzsche, is pushing towards an anti-religious existentialism. This, of course, is pushing towards Marxism. But what they all share, right, is they share a sense that Hegel's totalizing ideology has not captured the core of human meaning-making. We'll take a look at how this ramifies through Germany in the next episode. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Ooh, baby.
Yeah.
Meow, 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 meow. Rough, rough, rough. Rough, rough, rough.
Mew.
Rough, 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 rough.
Yeah, so the collapse of German idealism.
Yeah. Oh boy. Okay, so now you see where he was getting to. That's a very powerful critique.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Well, and there's a few critiques in here. So,
very important to understand.
So this idea of this total guide and the secularization of religion kind of started to collapse, and Schopenhauer, his critique, as well as the rest of them, is, well, will was not adequately addressed, like, the will of whether to life or power wasn't addressed. And Kierkegaard, I like this, Hegel made his system and sat beside it, which is, you're not participating in it. You don't have a perspectival knowing. of knowing the system.
That in and of itself is a damning critique.
You just trust that the system does it and it's right. You just got to know the system.
Hegel was trying to do something that was almost like a compromise for his time. He was trying to keep some of the spirit alive in his Geist idea and everything.
But he left the most important part, that perspectival, participatory.
He left out the perspectival and the participatory. Yeah, he did. And he's trying to give this totalizing explanation too, and so that gets latched onto. Schopenhauer and Kierkegaard go the distance. Well, Kierkegaard is the one who goes the distance with it. Yeah, he recognizes the lack of perspectival and participatory knowing,
which that's part of that the transformative experience, and the Socratic challenge, the self-talking, self-challenging to
improve yourself ethically and morally, so that you can transcend your egoic sense of self. So this is why the perspectival and participatory process have been lost. The process of anagoge, the process of enlightenment that you were just talking about there, has been fully separated from the idea of self-transcendence. Now they're arguing for a totally rational self-reflection that's no longer engaged in a process of self-transformation. So we're not making the world better by making ourselves better anymore. We're trying to affect the outer.
Yeah, so the way I broke that down in my notes is by totalizing transcendence, as in trying to make transcendence over the total and the everything. We lost the personal aspect of it. Yet again, losing the person for the people, if you will.
Yeah, we lost our participatory relation with it, and the process and the potential for growth and self-improvement. And, a sick society is the result of sick individuals, wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
It's...
And to think, like, reason is what makes the world doesn't fly, because we exist before we reason. Before we're reasonable, well, we definitely exist. We're little mush pudding people, but, it's like, okay, well, you can't... This rationality just isn't just there, isn't the starting point. This rational system isn't just this thing that was there. It's like before rationality and reason, there is something before that.
Yeah, we still existed beforehand. So well, in this time, for many people, the idealism of Hegel was no longer viable. And they were recognizing let me see here. Where did I leave off?
I'll take it further down.
Okay, yeah, here we are. For all of the grandeur of Hegel's what do you call it, theory, it lacks transformational process. So Kierkegaard, and then Vervaeke, Firestream, Vervaeke. How is his name pronounced? I already lost it.
Vervaeke, I think. But before we get into Vervaeke, Kierkegaard also critiqued there's no wisdom understanding. It's just this leap of faith, the understanding of the process. Trust the process. Yes. Trust the process that it works. And then Marx's critique.
Well, so he recognized what's missing is our involvement and our participation. And then Marx says history is driven by
the man,
by the monster.
Not by the man, but by the monster.
Not by reason, but by the irrational. What is the monster?
The monster is the socioeconomic,
in his eyes,
life that you exist to facilitate the drive for existence.
Yes. So history is driven by socioeconomic activity.
Yeah.
Firestream comes along, and this is a further rejection of religion altogether.
Yeah.
He sees religion as a noxious projection that deludes people.
Yeah.
And this idealized projection of one's own humanity is one's idea of God. And this is actually alienating us from our progression. So they are looking for a transformational process, but without religion now. And so instead of internal self-improvement, they're trying to affect reality by just addressing by just impacting the outer. right? So this is socioeconomic.
So
So you can tool around with this and that, but the individual, don't worry about the individual self-realizing and improving and become more ethical and this and that.
yeah, so with the religion as a projection, religion is a projection which, blinds us or deludes us from our authorship of history.
Yes.
So it removes, or it keeps us from seeing the fact that we make history, and
Yeah, Marx is missing the fact that we totally knew that we took part in history. We just did so in the idea that we were in a co-creation. And this is pre-Christian. This is Plato too, as well. This is
and that now there's this authorship of history idea. It's like, well, we write the history. It's like, well, I think we interpret the history more than we write it. Like, events are written down. History is a participation in interpretation of events.
yeah. We're applying meaning to subjective views onto everything that's happening.
So Marx believed that this dialectic was the monster. It was a socioeconomic dialectic. So it was now opposing, in his case, classes.
Yes, yeah. The clash is not between ideas. It's a process of political struggle.
Yeah.
We have classes in conflict.
Yeah, no longer the ideal or ideas clashing, but actual classes of people, that are classed according to socioeconomic standards.
Yeah, so we don't make the world better by being the change you wish to see in the world. No. You actually need to fight.
Yes, to usher us into this utopia. This utopia, the revolution must, what is that? Yeah, the revolution
It calls
is
for violence.
Yeah. So
To
I
put
have
it bluntly.
classes are independent and define each other. So the upper class is defined by the lower class in their relationship, oppressed oppressor in this case.
Yes.
Such classes work out the contradictions of these socio-political problems and usher in the utopia. So the clashes between the classes, so the oppressed, the bourgeois and the proletariat, in this case, these constant clashes, this constant action is what actually works out. So that's the synthesis. Like, that's what's creating the synthesis, is actual clashes between classes. Workers of the world unite. There's the workers, and then the exploitative
History
capitalists.
is a dialectic. Yes,
Yeah.
classes that are interdependent. It's a dialectical process to find the promised lands, the utopia. It's still filled with religious substitute terminology because there's a religious instinct in the human being. So you notice every time that we come up with a new theory, a way of being, a new mode, existential mode,
But this utopia is the current understanding, or the correct understanding of history. History. It's the correct. So it's not even
history,
like like, oh, everybody gets along and has enough to eat, and we got good medicine, and it's like
No. Talk
everybody
about,
understands history correctly.
We thought Hegel had hubris.
Yeah,
Marx takes it to another level. The level of certainty is frightening.
Yeah, and this. So
Marx,
he used the term violent totalistic ideologies, basically,
Yes.
and it's the totalistic end. It's this
that totalizing aspect of it, the totalitarian instinct that's how
this is
Hegel
the be all
was
end all.
was the godfather of totalitarianism. Accidentally, he didn't realize what he was doing. He certainly paved the way for this, and Marx brings to fruition the secularization of Hegel.
Yeah,
He thinks he's providing the participatory solution that wasn't there in Hegel. And it's a political, social revolution. It is violent, totalizing, and it's providing secular ideologies about a utopia that will be the realization of history.
Yeah, basically,
rather than self-improvement and being the change you wish to see, being a better person.
The revolution becomes God.
The revolution becomes God.
Because with if we go back to
so now it's good to kill the people that disagree with this view.
Yeah. So like the dialectic system becoming God, in the sense of like what Hegel was thinking about. In Marx's idea, it's the revolution.
The revolution is the kairos.
The revolution is the proper usage of the dialectic. It becomes God. So when you go to church, you go to a protest, something else or the other. It's the same thing as going to mass. That's what like James Lindsay is on about all this, and he's not far off. Like, man, dude, he's a mathematician, but
James
he's
Lindsay,
a
who
math
runs
linguist,
new
if you will.
discourses.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
check out New Discourses on YouTube, guys.
he talks, like, if you're
And the
interested
website.
in this particular set of beliefs and psychotechnologies, he really covers it. Like, and he doesn't hold back either, because when he brings up this is very cult like, well, it is. It's a
all very
secular
cult-like,
cult.
yes.
The radical ideologies are cults.
Yes, that's why we're talking about all the religious terminology that's being used.
Yeah, like, quite literally, they're using religious terminology.
No.
and,
You have
like,
the utopia in place of the promised land. The kairos is the revolution. The kairos of Christianity becomes the turn to utopia. Here in Marxism.
The revolution is the kairos, and even beyond that, like, the reason why I say it's God too is because, like, well, we worship, as Christians, we worship God as, like, Jesus is God as well.
Sure.
It's just
This
the
idea
kairos
is
of
the
God.
new way. This
The
ideology.
revolution is the Son of God, if you will,
Yes.
that we worship. So instead of being Christians,
the new way that we're going to follow, instead of trying to follow this way of unconditional love,
we're revolutionaries. That's what we are.
Loving your neighbors and enemies, and turning the other cheek, and not lying, and not judging, and not murdering, and not killing. We're going to do this thing.
Yeah.
This is the new God.
But all these critiques from Kierkegaard and Marx, and someone else probably, and a lot of other people, they all share the sense that Hegel has not captured the entirety of what humans are. One person thinks he forgot about will, like he wasn't accounting in will, so that was Schopenhauer. And then you have Kierkegaard, which was like, well, he's lacking the participatory end, and then Marx is being like, well, he's lacking the participatory end, and it's actually not an idea thing. This isn't a philosophical thing. This is real. This is socioeconomic, and it's a conflict between the haves and the have-nots, and the haves are naturally oppressing the have-nots, and it's the relationship between oppressed and oppressor that drives this ever-changing machine until eventually it ushers in this, well, I think Marx called it true socialism, or like this socialistic utopia, like using communism. So first it's the class awakening, that would be the proletariats awakening up. And then from class awakening, you have the dictatorship of the proletariat,
Yes.
which would be enforcing this is what we're going to do through revolutionary violent means. And then you will instill communism, which will prep us. And so communism is centralized from the center out distribution and control of everything, where everybody owns everything, but it has to go to a central point and then move out. And that will set us up for perfect socialized man and perfect socialist utopia, where we'll understand our history correctly and be happy for eating the bugs and living in the pod. Sorry, I had to throw that in there, but that's nuts. That's absolutely freaking bonkers.
Yeah.
Like,
it doesn't work. We've tried it.
Well, yeah. Well, precisely, and it's been tried many times.
Practice, it does not work.
It's like, okay, well, there is, I can agree with, okay, they're first, yes, an awakened class. Like, I don't mean like class, but I mean like people waking up, like waking up to what's going on, and trying to come to grasp with their place in the world and what does it all mean. There is that awakening. But this idea of having to use, like, dictators, like dictation, like, so the dictatorship of the proletariat, it's this awakened class, this special class of people that are awakened, which I don't agree with. Oh, they're going to wake up and they're going to make the right thing happen. And then the system, I guess the system he championed was communism.
Yes.
Like this system will hold it down for socialism to blossom. So we're using these awakened select people to create a socioeconomic system that will usher us into some secular religious happy ending. Like it breaks down after
you can
people
see
waking
the
up.
desperation of humanity. We're trying to find a new explanation for this reality within we find ourselves.
Sure.
You know, we find ourselves in this endless space on this living planet, and previously we had a very grounding way of looking at the world. You know, we had our religions, we had our spiritual understanding, our relation, and we had this belief that everything was alive, and we were in participation with it, and we were in relation with it. And the more technologically adept we became, the more we started to psychologically separate ourselves from the initial realization of our inherent oneness with everything around us.
We learn that there isn't like spirit in things, and the lodestone doesn't move because it has some type of will. You know, like we learned about that through trial and error and learning more. Of course, we're going to leave behind certain perceptions.
There's a
of
physical
the world.
explanation, you could say. There's a cause and effect thing that happens, but we still don't know if there isn't spirit behind all of that, and that's just the way that it ordered everything. So it's. But we come back to the question of God over and over and over again.
And
you can't get rid of it.
And then the idea of what is spirit and talking about that is important. Like, I mean, just because they were kind of wrong in the past doesn't mean that it's all wrong. Like they were like getting there. You know, like the original natural philosophers were wrong about a lot of things, but the core nuggets of what they were trying to build, you know, the scaffolding of the mind, if you will.
There are explanations for why matter acts the way it does and why the world is where it is. There's stories for how the earth was created. All those things
but
aren't
puts you in
actually accurate, but
a mental state of.
But they were able to teach wisdom to people. They were able to teach self-realization. People were able to learn how to overcome their psychology, their habits.
Well, if I was to tell you,
they were able to self-improve. They were able to even experience, when they went far enough into these self-realization practices, they were able to experience the inherent oneness and interconnectedness, and all cultures around the world have documented and talked about this and still hand down ways of achieving these states. So we know that there is a state of oneness that is possible for human beings. This is why we've been trying to develop religions and explanations as to why we're here, for all of this time. And these ideas have been battling for a long time. Now we've come up with secular versions of these things, and secular ideologies, secular explanations for this ineffable reality.
Well,
we still don't know how this thing.
And the idea of secular,
right?
The very idea of secular, and
there's a level of certainty there.
Well,
that seems
it came from after a mass die-off of people and a really terrible thing, and then people having to be like, well, we need more people to work, and I got the chance to do things, and we created new systems to deal with that, and then in order to deal with that, we had to create the idea of the state. That allows people to interact, and then that realm.
If there's no transcendent good, if there's really truly is no transcendent good for us to be inspired by and to grow towards, then you have to develop an increasingly strong state, increasingly strong rule sets to keep people in line, especially if you're not even trying to work on them morally at all anymore.
Yeah,
and that's kind of
particularly if you believe that we can't help ourselves.
We're feigning and pretending that we're trying to be self-responsible, but at this point in history, we're opening the doors for everything.
So a lot of this new,
almost anything goes nowadays.
I will say since the whatever, the plague or the whatever took everybody out, because it wasn't just one thing, but a lot of things, but mostly just one thing. I think it was the Black Death.
Yeah.
But there was also a period of time where a lot of things were taking a lot of people out. So, it was mass die-offs. Like, so this new...
The church had become corrupt in this time.
This new stuff, I think one of the reasons why it's so dark is because that cast a huge shadow on, like, it seemed like before we had more of like, well, even though the world got kind of tore up during the Hellenistic period and all that stuff, it's still like a beautiful, vibrant world that I feel a part of. And then it was just like, bam, most y'all are freaking dead. It's going to be horrible. There's going to be piled up in the streets. You're going to just feel like crap. The church that you normally go to is going to start persecuting the crap out of you. And you're going to be bitter and angry.
Arresting heretics. It's going to form a secret police, and it's going to get all paranoid itself.
And it's going to make people really bitter and angry. And I really think Martin Luther was a bitter, angry person.
We created Marx. We created all of humanity. We did this. Religions obviously weren't perfect. They were mankind's best attempts at trying to describe a relationship with this ineffable mystery we find ourselves in. And we were doing the best we could.
And also
that's all that we've been doing all along.
It wasn't just us, but the world also created Marx too, because, you know, this mass dying off and everything too. That's one of the things. It's like, well, we are agents and the world is an arena and we co-identify, but when the arena changes, the agents change within the arena to keep up with, you know, the game, if you will,
right,
between the two. So it's like, you know, we have to be careful, because when like real big upsets happen, and, you know, a few years ago one happened and now it's starting to, you know, like, yeah, we're not locked into our houses anymore in certain places. But now we're dealing with economic fallout on the edge of World War III, you know, all this other type of stuff.
If we're not already
if we're not careful with our meaning making and our reasoning and the new systems that we create to cope with this, we could just lead to another Marx. We could lead to
another,
you know, like
any other great despot, tyrannical.
You know, and Marx was
leader,
he was just
totalitarian regime,
a very sinister. And, you know, some people say he was also a Satanist. I haven't seen too much proof, but like reading some of Marx's and stuff, like I would say that comes from the separatory aspect of God
and the rejection of Christianity at this time, and the way that people are looking at it as noxious. Yeah. You know, something noxious.
And it's a projection too. It's us projecting our.
You
crap
could see
onto
him at
the
least
world.
playing with the ideas, you
and
know, or entertaining and enjoying, you know, the ideas of Satanism, because as a rebuke to Christianity, as a way to say F you.
I mean, I've done some looking into Satanism, and some of the stuff is relatively reasonable.
Sure, in their grudge towards modern religion as the opiate of the masses. Yeah. Certainly, the institutionalization of religion has not done a great job of exemplifying the way that figures like Christ and Buddha were trying to share with us. You know, the over institutionalization, the over how do you describe it? Oh, anyway, central authoritative bodies, you know, cultural ideas of a time imprint themselves onto something, and it's not the religions that are the problem. It's that we are infallible as human beings. It's not political systems in general or secularization even that's a problem. It's that we as humans are infallible. We are imperfect, and we are
fallible.
We're not infallible. Yeah. We are fallible. Thank you.
We're infallibly fallible
and imperfect. Yeah, for sure.
Well,
so, you know, it's that's kind of where we find ourselves, and we've got to recognize that all of these religions are just attempts of humans to try and describe a relationship with the indescribable, with the ineffable, with the infinite. And we'll always be reaching towards it, and we can always continue to perfect these spiritual practices that we take part in.
Well, and then so the negative aspects that we see in like religion or science or politics or anything are probably more from us misunderstanding the way things are and the way the world is and the way we are.
Misunderstanding each other.
The things that do work are where we're like kind of right, and we're like, so we should start going towards the more where we're kind of right and not reveling in like, well, yeah, like certain aspects that I don't enjoy about religion is I don't like the idea that there has to be someone or something between you and God. That's one thing that, like, call me a Protestant, you'd probably be right, but I do believe in there is always a connection with the divine within you. It helps to have other people to help you realize it. Of course, that's what your priests and your preachers are actually. They're not the guy between you and God.
They're not the intermediary through which you communicate to God.
There's also the zealotry, you know, the my way or the highway, and my way is the only way because my God's better than your God. I don't dig that, but that's coming from not understanding how humans are and how the world works, and casting our own little messed up psychology shadows onto God and diminishing God with our shadow.
Yeah.
You know,
that's
what I say a few weeks ago, diminishing the light of God with our shadow.
Yeah.
You know, like, and so that's the wrong way.
We jump on these things and we're like, we want to blame Christianity, all of Christianity, basically. It's just all bad.
Or
Jesus
you know,
guy was on point.
Some people blame the Jews, and, you know, well, Martin Luther, you know, he did that. And some people, you know, like we went through 9/11 and it was just all blaming all the Muslims, even though it's like, you know, most Muslims are Asian, right? Okay, but they're not the Middle Eastern people that we think of that, and
and most
that
of them aren't into violent extremism either.
No, actually, for a long period of time, if you look at it, like the most scientific civilizations that were like the forefront were Muslim.
Yes. Yes.
But you can look at what went bad with anything. That doesn't define the totality of it. That's the problem with totalitarian ideals. It's like, oh, well, everything can fit into this freaking box. I'm like, dude, we're not a liquid. I guess you can paste us into a liquid and force us all into the box, but everything's a little bit different, and there's too much chaos in the world for you to have a complete grasp and be like, nope, this is the way, or it'll become the way.
So anything that's too certain,
that
completely dismisses. So basically, if there's any challenge to its view, to its theory, then it says that you're an enemy and you should die and this and that. Then that's probably not a good ideology to be trying to support. It's not open to self-improvement. It's not open to challenge.
I would even go as far to say, like, certainty is something we should personally
absolutely I agree,
try to stay away from. Like, you can be mostly certain about a lot of things. Like, when I wake up tomorrow, gravity's still going to be working. Like, I'm not talking about that, but like,
there's gradations of reliability of different information. If I'm looking at something, I can say, okay, I can feel pretty certain about this, but why ever be completely certain? There might be new information that comes along that could actually challenge.
Wouldn't life be more enriching if we
delighted
in the uncertainty? It's like, what's going to happen? I don't know. That's why we like watching movies. That's why we like reading books, is that uncertainty. I don't know what's coming next. I don't know. We should delight in that.
It can seem disorienting. It can seem scary to drop and let go of your certainty, and it can be a little... It can be a little scary for the ego, the idea of, oh my gosh, I was wrong and I was believing this or believing that. Don't identify with your ideas, first off. Like, why would you identify with your ideas? Ideas are constantly changing anyway.
So are identifiers and identities as well. So
yes, exactly. Yeah, we're malleable ourselves as personalities.
I identify as a single man, but if I get married, I will identify as a husband.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like,
but you are not your personality. You have a personality. And who is the you that has the personality is the subject of self-inquiry, mindfulness, meditation. You can spend the rest of your life and all eternity working that one out. You'll find that there's nothing there. That somehow there is awareness.
Well, it's
pure, it's clear, it's aware, it's peaceful. It's actually quite blissful the longer and deeper you go into it. You'll find that it's bottomless, it's depthless, it has endless insightfulness to it. But everything that we... Oh, I just lost my train of thought. Okay.
It's an empty pureness that is aware.
Awareness, yes.
But without...
We have frames
thinking and reacting.
Yes.
Like awareness without reaction.
Well, awareness...
Even down to
it can react with as Bruce Lee described it, like water works. It's the way Bruce Lee described Wu Wei. It's action that is no action.
Yeah.
It's an automatic thing that just happens. It's basically a dance. It's a flow in concert with reality. There's no you anymore. You're just part of reality.
I think Krishnamurti would call that, like, he would refer to that as the observer. So the observer that's behind all the things.
The observer is the observed.
Yeah,
yes.
And so, like, I've mentioned this before in the show, but the moment when you're on a train going by looking at the scenery, the moment before you go, oh, that's beautiful.
Yes.
That moment is the observer without the layers of identity placed on top.
The framings of perception through which we experience and see reality. Yes.
So
you can see your frames.
You could call that this. You could really call that the self if we did the sticky ball method. It's this.
Yes.
Sticky ball, and if you have nothing else on it, that's the moment before you start sticking things to it, because the self is ultimately at the center of all relationships.
There's a freeness in that moment, and that moment can stretch out, and it can be incredibly peaceful, because you're letting go of the idea of self, even though
it makes you lighter.
You feel home, and you still feel your sense of I.
Yeah.
You don't lose it. There's capital S self there. There's not the psychological egoic sense of self, all the traits and ideas that you have about yourself.
Yeah, not the stuff stuck to the ball.
That stuff can even be there, and you can observe it and recognize, wait, there's a part of me that can observe all the traits and ideas and beliefs that I have. The ways that I see the world. The way the ways that we would describe ourselves to people, we can see that. And what is it that sees that? Because if you are your personality, then there would be nothing to be looking at the personality. But clearly we can see our own personality. We can see our anger arise in ourselves, or sadness, or happiness. You can see your thoughts come up in your own mind. And there is this free awareness.
You can catch yourself wandering.
It's this home base. You can catch yourself wandering. Yes. And what is it that's catching it? It's not an idea. So this is a really beautiful mystery when you go into it. It's crazy. It's paradoxical, because it's like, yeah, I'm aware and I feel my sense of I and I feel completely fine. But I'm recognizing that I'm not any of these things that I can say about myself.
Yeah. Well, and that's where the wisdom traditions that we are attempting to get back in one way or another. That's why they're so necessary, because we'll probably not ever be able to truly describe what that is, but that's why we go through, call them rituals, call them experiences, call them whatever, guided, whatever you want to go through. We go through these things. So it's like, I can describe the mountain to you, but until we walk it, it's an experiential realization
of our interconnectedness, and rather than just knowing intellectually that you're interconnected with everything, because you know about how atoms move and this and that.
Yeah, and how do you explain?
You feel this in this sense of oneness that is unmistakable, and it's immediately recognizable. Like, oh yeah, that's right. It's weird. Yeah, and it's hard to describe, because you're still in your own human form with your own individual perspective, yet you are realizing unmistakably your inherent connectedness and oneness with everything. You're feeling it experientially. It's like one. You're everything.
Yeah. So how would you explain blue to a blind man? What I would try to do would be to describe the things that blue makes me feel, or cool water, other things like that, things that we associate blue with, but the blind man will never see the blue. We are the blind man. Yeah. And the wisdom practices are describing what blue is through things that we can experience. It's cool. Okay, red is hot. That's basically what we're blind men.
The Tao Te Ching starts out saying the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. Yeah. And at the very end, it basically says anything that says about the Tao is not true. So it's basically the entire book is about pointing at something that you're going to kind of make it to on your own. All the words are just there to point at the thing that cannot be named, that cannot be talked about. It's like God cannot be named. We have a word for this thing, God, but it can never be summed up in any one word by any means, and it never will be. Whatever it is that we're pointing to when we say God.
And I also think that's like at the core of, Muslims. They don't depict God, and they don't depict the prophets, and they don't use imagery. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very much that idea, whereas, like, say, if you make an image of it, then now you take away from it.
That's the recognition of the danger of confining it into certain one idea.
Because then it's no longer
if you're saying it's this way, then other people are going to say, no, it's that way.
And
people argue and fight over it. And you're limiting it, and it should be something that is never contained, because there's infinite room for us to grow in our understanding and comprehension. Yeah. And improve through our knowing of it. So it should never be boxed in and contained into one single idea.
Yeah, and so
it's the infinite.
And in like Christianity, you have the don't worship it. What is it? Do not worship any god above me, or basically other than me. Mm-hmm. And that's covered under idolatry. Don't make idols. Because then you're worshiping the idols, and you're not worshiping the thing that the idol is supposed to
creating ideas. This is the transcendent source of
all. And Jesus, when he's like, don't worship me, because if you worship me, you're just
I think that was a big mistake. I was talking with a friend of mine about this the other night, and she was saying the same thing. She's like, that feels like a trap that the modern church played. It's like, and I'm thinking about this now, like whether they meant to do that or not, and I'm sure some figures maybe more so than others perhaps
but
did.
Is it not a normal human compulsion to want to try to put things in a container to understand it?
That's exactly, I think.
So it might not be a grand conspiracy. It might just be good-willing people that got things wrong and thought too highly of themselves in some cases, and because
and I think you're right there when you say maybe thought too high of themselves in some cases, because
I'm right.
Unruly,
my God is better than your God.
A way to rule them.
My God could beat my
these
God
unruly
beats up
masses,
your God.
You got to figure out a way to get them to all get along, because they're not well educated, and they're
Well, and
always fighting and
in the church or the temple or whatever period of time, even all the way back to the shaman who would deal with the spirits and stuff like that, that's always been a cornerstone of human civilization. And once the particularly the Western axial age happened, that's a whole new understanding of the world that you have to really compete with.
yeah.
And so you have the old churches, the Hebrew churches, and then this, new Christianity arising out of that has, these new ideas and claims that this is the Messiah, the second, coming of God down on there. And, taking the idea of agapic love, making persons out of people. And then you get the people who followed Jesus around, and then the people who followed those people around, and then throughout time and wrote about it, and new realizations, and still the influence of the East still making its way as everything goes back and forth. It's like it's hard to keep up with. Like time seems like it moves slow, but time actually moves pretty freaking fast. What was it, 2,000 years since Jesus was born, and how long did it take to get to the iron? Basically,
it's hard to believe that it's literally just like. So that's like 20 men ago, or 20 humans ago. If a human can live 100 years, that's just 20 people ago. Jesus. Isn't that wild? It's not that much time at all. You're right. It's a very short amount of time.
And comparatively, like, when was the Upper Paleolithic transition? And then
we've been trying to get back there ever since. We lost touch because we no longer, once we started to blow up civilizationally, like the place of the shaman and the tribe was erased very quickly.
True.
And once you cease to have that shaman, that wise person, that could help facilitate journeys into altered states of consciousness and great growth for the individuals in the tribe. Once you lost that, you didn't have this inbuilt, like almost like super psychotherapeutic / self-actualization / self-transcendence model in place. We removed the shaman,
and I
medicine men and the medicine woman.
I think a lot of that is
killed the witches,
scaling as well. So like a shaman really only
lost
works.
knowledge of the fruits. We forbade the fruits. This is where the disconnection happened. So in some of the hubris of these rulers of their times, I think that they impressed their own social values onto this way that Jesus represented for us, this unconditional, loving, agape orientation to life.
And then there's also the animal nature of humans. So it's like the shaman really only works up to 250 people, because you have to have a personal working relationship. So then once you could have many different little areas that have their own little shaman.
Yeah.
But once they conglomerate, do you get a super shaman, or how does that work? Okay, well, you're super shaman. Well, we got to make a church or a religion that has all these shamans
a lot of
working
our first
together.
leaders were half god and like the pharaohs, like half god and half man kind of things, or sometimes they were just seen as gods in general.
But you could think imagine the developing of what we think of as church religion from shamans. So it'd be small communities all with their shamans, and then they all become so integrated and interspersed to the point where now you can't have a shaman that knows all 250 people in its area. Yeah. So now you create a church that even more people can come to have this experience.
And then a stronger state too.
There's many shamans within this temple, this church. Call them, prophets, or call them
But it still gets depersonalized. The more people there are packed together,
well, that's
the less important the shaman is the state can just clamp down and use violence to control people and punish people. So there's less actual self-growth within the individuals, since they're no longer in small tribes.
Yeah.
The health of the society isn't based upon how healthy each individual is anymore. It's just how strong the state is at managing the people. Yeah. So you have less motivation and less process for self-improvement and self-realization.
Yeah. And that's where it's, to
this day, we're still trying to fix things by affecting the outer. We're always trying to change laws, increase or decrease taxes, do this, do that. It's never about us living a better life within, and seeing that as really this is how we change society, because society is nothing but individuals. And we have these old adages, like these ideas, be the change you wish to see, and all of that. So I think we kind of know this inherently, that that's really actually how it works.
Yeah, but working on yourself is hard.
It's hard, though. It's hard to teach that to people, especially in a fast-paced modern world.
Paying $2 a month to a company that says they're going to help starving kids in Africa is easy.
Yeah.
And
then you can just feign and feel virtuous. You can act virtuous by saying, well, I support those guys without having to do any of the actual work.
And what is it, intellectual junk food, or what was that?
Well, he had spiritual junk food.
Spiritual junk food. Yeah, it's easier to eat the spiritual junk food because it gives you an immediate blast instead to
you just go out on the side of this movement, and then maybe
instead
you go
of
out
cooking,
1 or 2 times,
growing and cooking your own spiritual food,
Yeah.
and trading spiritual food with your neighbors. You get the junk food version.
Yeah,
that's destructive to you and your neighbors.
Really, I think if a lot of us were trying to become more loving, understanding, kind people, and we were willing to have conversations with those with whom we would traditionally disagree, and we do so with a willingness and an intention to find solutions together, I think that changes the whole game. We're just not being tuned that way right now. We're actually being tuned in a game of divide and conquer and being pit against one another.
I guess we need to make this meaning-making game more fun.
I think we have to, man. Yeah, because we're letting
more
it greedy.
Exciting, and I want to be a part of it. Because I find this exciting, but there's only a few people who sit down and let me jabber at them about this enough to get them intrigued about it. So it's like, because most people are like, I just want to, watch the game, or like, why are you talking about this at the bar? And it's like,
it feels like too much. It feels like too much to carry. And since we have lived such privileged, cush lives here in our industrialized nations for all of our living existences, those of us that are alive, we don't realize how close people are at any one time from real struggle and suffering, how quickly things can turn in a country or on a planet.
Yeah, well, most people in this country are like a broken leg and a fractured hand away from being completely destitute. So,
and we're just trying to distract ourselves from
that's how close you are.
Yeah,
and actually,
most people are in debt, extreme debt.
Yeah, and that's actually similar to how it used to be before we had all these luxuries, where it's like, well, if you broke your leg, you can't feed yourself anymore.
We're not totally content, but we're very entertained.
This is a new challenge,
deluded and distracted,
that evolution has created for us to get past. That's what the only thing that gives me hope is the idea that this is a challenge that, if met properly, we will evolve, become greater, and become something I haven't seen before, and humanity may have never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Something truly beautiful. Not the end, but a next beautiful step.
Yeah.
Maybe a new beginning for the human species if we can get over what we're going through right now.
I can see another step forward happening for sure. And
like another,
I think part of the reason that a lot of people
era.
are easily avoiding the subject we're talking about here and find it easy to turn off is because it doesn't feel real yet. A lot of people don't realize the many myriad existential crises facing our species at once right now. And I'm not talking like climate change.
No.
I'm talking about much more immediately dangerous capacities that we are developing through our technological capacity or aptitude. Not just nuclear devastation, but bioengineering. There's a whole list that we can go
even
down
the ability
here.
For us to collectively drive ourselves mad. We're
killing the ocean, we're killing the topsoil,
psychological pathogens, if you will. Like now we have the internet, and we have other things.
The danger
and
of
people
civilizational breakdown is huge.
Yeah,
yes,
because
we can do it.
Symptoms, we can do it faster than ever before.
All the symptoms are occurring now around the world that precede major civilizational collapse. You see a lot of power players rallying to jockey into position to gain power in the vacuum.
You're seeing an all-out assault on farmers globally. That's never good.
No. The trust in our own nation is severely degraded, and there's sides that are so extremely partisan now and broken off from one another that they cannot agree on anything, even a basis for reality. And that cannot go on too long before the nation self-destructs. That is inevitably what happens. And I don't think people realize how bad it is, unfortunately. I think we've gotten some clues as to that. You know, I think during COVID, the talk of potential civil war finally became something that was real to people.
Yeah.
This was something that was a little crazy to talk about before, but I think now people realize, oh my gosh, we could be a little bit closer to that than I would like to imagine.
I would venture to say that there are people with invested intention in furthering this revolution, if you will, this divide, because like, what's the one way to really solve problems without violence? Conversation. What's the one thing that you can't have in a university now? Conversation. Like literally like banning like I've seen like
certain things you can't think or say now.
Deans and high level people in colleges calling out whatever conservative speaker as like, you know, like neo-Nazis and white supremacists.
I've seen known progressives and famous liberal journalists
and then
get called far right over and over and over.
Oh, and
again.
that one guy who just put out, you know, it's like it's more admirable to kill than it is to like basically just use your words. And he was a notable academic.
There's been a number of people calling for death of people that disagree with them too. Yeah, so you're calling for death of people like Dave Chappelle, then, right? That's literally what you're doing.
Yeah,
because he doesn't agree with you.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and he might have been talking more about the conservatives that tried to come onto college campuses, which used to be the bastion for free speech. Even the most despicable ideas could be discussed in a university. Actually, they had to be discussed there because that's the place for it.
Yes. Yes. No. You should just kill those people.
Yeah. So
that disagree with the way that you see.
The only way we've gotten to this point is, we've.
Just calling for violence, even in a flippant way, as though you're trying to make a point forcefully.
Well, it's
disgusting.
It's the revolution, man. It's that, you know, it's revolution, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's all that's left when people can't talk anymore and they can't communicate anymore is violence.
That's why
we're getting pushed more and more into that in our industrialized nations. You're seeing people identify with a right or a left team, right, and they're deepening those trenches that they're hiding in. Walling themselves off, not interested in conversation, demonizing and increasingly dehumanizing the other side. And when you see that dehumanization start to happen of an entire large group of people, so you're not thinking about the individuals, you're just thinking about the entire group in a certain demeaning way, that precedes violence always, increasingly so.
Yeah, and that's why I think
inevitably, there's the word I'm looking for.
That's why I think it's very important that as many people as we can get on board with, you know, making sense and making meaning, whether it's awakening from the meaning crisis or just meaning making and getting back into these traditions and talking and discussing is more important now than ever, because what technology has done for us right now it's given us the ability to increase the rate at which we destroy ourselves. You know, if you think World War I and World War II was bad, you know, they had basic, you know, telegram service and then radio services and stuff like that, and news didn't travel that fast. It could be a few days to a few weeks before you got, you know, orders to do something. Now everything's instant.
Yeah, without strong moral agents, man, you're just going to increase narcissism, perversion, abuse, neglect, addiction in your society.
You know, make all those things virtuous.
And make all those things virtuous. Why not? Yeah.
Which is, you know, the opposite of what you should do, because like virtue should be those qualities that help you gain wisdom. They're virtues. Virtual.
They take work.
They're things that are your virtual machine.
They're hard earned. You don't just get them for being.
Yeah.
You know, everyone deserves love, though. That's what's beautiful about the start of this way of living, is that you start out with an orientation of agapic love, unconditional love for everything and everyone, but you're still realistic, and you're still, you know, you're not out to be an asshole, but you're.
Sometimes you got to be an asshole, but you got to know when, you know.
There we go.
And sometimes you really, you know, like, you got to love, but sometimes the love is to have, like, you know, like the stereotypical, you know, like, keep a step off her lip, and, you know, that the guy that was a little hard on the kid, and then the kid becomes good, and he finally says, you know, something inspirational, and they both have a tear in their eye.
You got to care enough to respond. If you're able to respond, then you're responsible, and you got to care enough. So you know,
if I'm responding, I care. Like, if I didn't care, I wouldn't get upset when I do. I wouldn't, you know, like, hell, like even the people who we, would say are like completely lost, they still get upset. They still care. They may not know what they're caring about, but there's a caring there, and they, like, they need to help something. They need to do something. That's a calling of humans. It's what we do. But it's a funny world we live in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not haha funny, but
encouraging narcissism and division isn't going to do it for us.
No,
doesn't seem to be working.
It's going to take that caring potential that we have, that we want to do, and turn it into something very neurotic and negative.
Yeah.
Well, that's modern day activism at this point. It's like, I care so much, I'm going to burn your building down. I'm sorry, guys, but like, like I've seen a lot over the past few years, like usually pretty grainy when it comes to the live stream stuff moving around, but like high def, if you will. Other than being there, I've seen a lot, and it's just, it wears on you. I'm trying to keep hope in humanity, but dude, unless we the being an asshole part is sometimes we just, if you have these thoughts about seeing things that are going completely wrong and everybody's just like doesn't want to look at it or agrees with it, nah, state your piece. What's the worst that can happen? They call you a loser and they ostracize you.
We need to be able to speak up now, guys. We've got to be able to speak our minds and tell the truth now. And we can try and find conciliatory ways to phrase things.
Well, yeah, you want to get the point across.
We're trying to actually get through to people.
Yeah,
we're not trying to close off and develop new groups.
Yeah, don't
to charge against other groups.
Bludgeon them with your ideas. Like you want them to be able to, like, even if they don't agree, at least understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that's like the hardest thing, like when engaging with people that are very ideologically possessed.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even get to the point of understanding this isn't all of them. Like, this isn't all people who are that end, but this is just a general
thing.
I understand.
Much of the Kool-Aid they have drank.
And it's just, they don't even understand what you're trying to say.
We can be very lost by our belief systems to the point to where we close ourselves off to new information so strongly that the possibility of something alternative being true doesn't even figure into our imagination. Yeah,
actually,
they're not even willing to hear you because you're automatically wrong at default.
My Christian
you're cruel and hateful, and you should.
My Christian friends will either get a laugh out of this or kind of hate it, but like those Bible thumping super Christians are, pretty much same behavior as what we call this woke thing. All they have to do is say the words and believe in the system and have this leap of faith, and everything will be fine. And if you say anything about it, you're wrong and you're evil and you're on the outs. Now, am I talking about the super cringy Christians, or am I talking about the woke? You decide.
You don't know. That's the problem with it. With our certainty is that you can become too literalistic. You can become too fundamentalistic. And that's why we got to try and
you just end up
embrace the paradox.
If you go either way, you'll just end up in a cult. So, might as well stay in the middle. I get it. If you don't like going to church, I don't like going to church. Well, unless it's two or more people.
Just be a human being first. God, take Chris Rock's advice on politics. Just be a human being first. We don't have to identify as Republicans and Democrats first and foremost, or liberal or progressive or independent or Democrat. First and foremost, we're human beings, and we're going to be different things on different subjects anyway. I'm not going to be liberal about everything or conservative about everything.
Sure. I'm the most conservative liberal you'll ever meet. Yeah, I know I look like a hippie, but like, you're a hippie. I'm like, I'm actually like closer to like a hillbilly or like country town bumpkin than anything. I'm just curly and I play music, so I'm surrounded by hippies.
Right.
They rub off on you.
Well, self-expression and freedom of self-expression is a beautiful thing too.
Sure. And, hey, you be you. As long as you're not hurting anybody else, I think it's beautiful. The people who could truly be them.
Liberals and libertarians, and all freedom-loving Americans, even on the right-leaning side of the spectrum, embrace the quality of freedom of self-expression. We all do. We're trying to keep that alive. We're not trying to close that off.
Even the staunchest Republicans that I follow online, they still got gay friends and people who have different political beliefs and all that stuff like that, and they're like, no, I still love them. They're still my friends. Like, oh man, I think they're wrong.
What's crazy now is like what's so weird about today's day is the flip of the script, where the extremely prudish, strict-minded fundamentalist Christians 20 years ago, the things that they were upset about and trying to stop are the kind of like you see a lot of the people to the far left now, because trying to it's really confusing.
What's the saying that I learned from George Carlin? History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure as hell rhymes.
Yeah, it's rhyming a lot.
Yeah, the rhymes are getting quicker and quicker.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing with like the technology. It's just going to speed up, and it's going to become difficult to get yourself into this flow of keeping up with what's going on if you slip out of it too far. So another part of this meaning making, as well as like when you're trying to talk with people about all this stuff, is like help them be able to use the tools. And then like, you know, like when you watch a YouTube video and they're covering stuff and you see a news article pop up, but it doesn't have, you know, like the headline or whatever, but you can see the URL code. A lot of people don't know to look up there. Oh, there's a URL code, and type it in and they can bring it up themselves. You know, little things like that, or where to look for this and how to analyze what's going on and how to tell truth from not truth, particularly with the AI generated everything. You know, like whenever I see them, I can break them down. I'm like, oh, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem. In this case, I've been following AI art as it's going, and you know, deep fakes are old freaking news as far as I'm concerned. And now everybody's talking about deep fake this, deep fake that. I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's going to get
so it's
too
like
good to be able to tell very soon. The only thing that'll be able to tell you if it is a fake is another AI.
So we need to develop techniques that help us get into the flow state of understanding what's currently happening in the world.
Mm-hmm. Relating it with others so others understand it and we can figure it out together in fellowship.
Quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker.
Yes, getting more and more minds together to work on these problems at once.
And also just getting more people, like, you know, like I was showing my dad some, you know, stuff and some articles and videos and other stuff like that. And on the videos, you have a question about something, I'm like, no, it's right there. He's like, what do you mean? Yeah, it's, you know, they got the print up there. And I'm like, no, you can see like, oh, it's NewYorkTimes.com/blah. You can get that in there. It'll bring you right to it. Oh. If they don't have the links in the description, but they're showing something with the URL code, you can grab it. That's one example, but there's other examples of like how do you tell that, how would you tell if a picture on the internet is a real picture if it hasn't been photoshopped or faked? Well, what you do is you have a bunch of people who are all talking about it, and everybody's reasoning and working it out and using their different expertise to work it out. And you have a good network of people that you follow that can help gain more. And then you can participate in it by creating, say, your own channel or your own resources as well. So this is a whole new economy as well. It's the economy of ideas.
We can figure out what is
time.
True about this event that just happened, because I see CBS and CNN and New York Times and Washington Post talking about it this way, and then I see Fox and Breitbart and these guys over here talking about it this way.
But then I'm seeing
I see some independent journalists over here talking about it this way. You're gonna have to find the good faith actors from all of the different political stations that people can be in, and read through as much of it as you can. If there's a complex issue that you're trying to understand and it's important to understand it, then you're gonna want to look at multiple sides. Yeah. And then you'll get more of a holistic view, because each side is going to have its own bias.
Each event,
you're going to try and find the independent voices that speak on it in an unbiased fashion as well as you can, but they're not going to be perfect at it either. Yeah. So you're going to have to look at it as much as you can, and then you'll get a view.
It's about
you'll start to get a nuanced view of it, and you're like, oh, well, these people see it this way because of this. These people see it this way because of this.
7 to 10 different sources talking about each story that you go through. And this naturally happens if you build up your community of following people enough. You'll like see like, oh yeah, he was talking about he was talking about it too, and they were talking about it. And I saw Axios's article on it and all this stuff.
Yeah, and not everyone's going to look for 7, but at least look for.
It'll happen quicker than you think, because then somebody else will come up and you'll see another one. Just go ahead and read that one or listen to it, and then eventually you get into the habit of not really making an opinion on everything until you've gone through a certain amount.
Find reliable, good faith journalists out there that are conservative, that are progressive, that are independent, liberal, whatever, and see what they're all saying when any issue comes up and you're trying to get a view on it, and an accurate view of it. Because if you look at everybody's views, you'll start to see the actual picture, and you can form your own more informed view.
Yeah, and then you can tell who's like full of crap and who's not. When
You'll
you
definitely see where the
expand
crap
it
is,
over
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
It's not just an instant, an instant, an instant. It
Oh, yeah.
builds up over time, and then you can see trends.
Yep,
and,
you'll see the
you know.
trends, exactly. You'll see the trends of when the liberal media is presenting something a certain way, when the right-wing media is presenting something a certain way. You'll see the trends.
Actually, you can start
Yeah.
to predict them. So when something happens, you're like, you can almost write the headline and it comes up. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
Yeah, the problem isn't the left or the right. The left and the right need each other. The problem is actually,
You need both sides of your brain, man.
I would say corporatism today. It's global corporatists that think that they should rule the world rather than the nations of self-governance from which they were born.
Well, and the idea of a political class and a managerial class and a economic powerhouse class, and this whole, it's just like, yeah, no, you're just people. Like, I get it, grading people on incomes so you can figure out like what you need to do to make sure everybody's got what they need. But we just got the what do you call it, the journalist class. That's a thing right now.
right.
And like particularly with the Twitter stuff, you saw really how psychotic classism can become when you over-identify with your class,
Indeed.
if you will. And it's just like, no, like, we're the elite journalists. I'm like, yeah, but you guys aren't doing crap. The guy in the basement is doing way more work than
Actual
you're doing.
journalism.
And he's got to do a 9 to 5 that doesn't pay him crap, and he's still covering this stuff. So like, what are you doing with your resources, bro?
Yeah, and he's actually trying to report what's happening with
Yeah.
as little bias and personal opinion as he can. Meanwhile, you guys
Or
are
just
trying
say,
to
"This is
actually
my
sell
opinion,"
a narrative.
You
Or if he has an opinion, he's actually saying it.
Yeah.
Whereas you guys are selling a narrative for clicks and commercial revenue.
Oh, dude, I've seen so many opinion pieces that are in news that aren't op-eds, that aren't labeled as
So
op-eds.
much of
but
it
they're
seems
just
weaponized
full-
nowadays
oh,
too.
dude.
It's. Well, we're in a whole different level of game now. Definitely do believe that we are
And it's happening
experiencing psychological
faster
warfare.
and faster and faster.
Yeah.
And the idea is like, we're going to reach a singularity. Nope, it's just going to keep going faster, and we're going to adapt, and it's going to go faster and faster and faster. And
We're just learning how to surf increasingly well on an increasingly
Yeah.
growing wave.
That's cool. Like, I'm down with it, but it's like my greatest goal in life is to, help people as much as I can. And one way that I'd really like to help is like, hey, like, we need to make meaning out of this. It's going to get faster. All this stuff. Like, I've got a lot of sources and a lot of people in here I'd like to share with you.
You get to help
Let me share my network with you.
steer Spaceship Earth. Now, you can either take part in that or you can let other people choose the direction for you.
Hey,
But I'm not sure that they're going to steer it well.
yeah. And if you want to do that, fine, but don't punch me in the face for trying to steer planet Earth.
I don't want the greediest and most power hungry among us being the ones that end up ultimately steering us off a cliff or into their own desirable direction.
I'd rather them steer us into what's good for humanity.
I'd rather the multitudes of us figure it out together.
Hey man, if we get like an evil dictator and he makes humans great and everything's wonderful and he doesn't have to kill billions of people, I don't care that he's an evil dictator. Now the chances of an evil dictator doing that are like slim to none. But
I'm not even going to entertain that idea because people are always ready for the evil dictator that's going to do just that.
That's the thing. It's slim to none.
Yeah.
What I'm more concerned with is, can humanity survive this and become better for the next go round, which is going to come quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. I'm not too concerned who's going to do it, because ultimately, if you leave it up to the masses can become psychotic, and if you leave
Doesn't matter who does it as long as we do it.
As long as we do it.
As long as we do it.
And we do it better than we did before.
Yeah, because any child that you've ever loved is all the children on this planet, and they have this world to look forward to that we're handing down. So what are we going to do about it? Instead of just argue and bicker and amongst each other and just blame groups for all of our problems and
God, I just got an image for great.
trying to affect the outer to change everything when the greatest change comes from within, always has and always will.
I just got a really good image, like a good image that would make a good painting. So it's the future the children are looking forward to. And you could see like the perspective of the child looking, and it's like, sunshine, rainbows, bunnies, like happy stuff. And then the world that the elders are looking back on, and you see like fire and buildings crumbling and stuff like that. And the kids looking, it's like everything's beautiful and everything. And the elders are looking back
what
and
we had to go through to get here.
And then there's people in the fire trying to yell at the child, telling them that, this is all fire and brimstone and that's what it'll ever be. And the kid's just like, You know, make it really cute, but do it with like, you know, what Japanese horror is doing right now. You have really cute characters, but you put them in like horrific circumstances, so it fries your brain, but it gets the point
Yeah.
across.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, somebody paint that if you're a painter or an artist. You know, the children looking to the future with the child's eyes is, you know, the world's a beautiful, safe place until they realize it's not, and then the people looking in the past realizing how much we fucked this place up. But I don't want that picture. I'd rather it looking back and it's not cute rainbows and bunnies. It's vistas of, you know, beautiful mountains and like interesting cities and great experiences along the way.
It's not some fanciful.
Yeah, I don't want
the real world that is beautiful and waiting for us.
I don't want the next generation's elderly, like as in the generation after me when they're old, to look back on the world and be like, what did we do to this?
No,
How did we do this?
It's a really sad realization,
You know.
that to know that more than bunny rabbits and rainbows, all that the kids nowadays probably want as much more than anything is all kids throughout history have probably wanted is for the adults to stop arguing
Yeah.
and figure it out.
Because, you know, adults, when you're arguing, the kids in their room clutching their head or
And not knowing if reality
disassociating.
is stable anymore. Is this
Yeah,
sustainable? What's going to happen now? Are things going to fall apart? Well, you know, when people split up, things do often fall apart and get worse. We have to find ways to compromise and speak with one another again. I'm going to stop demonizing and dehumanizing one another. It's a dumb old game. We played it long enough.
Yeah,
We should be able to recognize when we're being pitted against each other.
I'm not playing that game no more.
No.
Every
old,
human's a
tired
human,
game.
and humans are gross and icky, but we're beautiful, wonderful creatures.
Yeah, man. Team Earthling all the way.
Yeah.
Team Earthling.
Humans
I don't care
first.
what kind you are.
Those aliens can, you know, they can fly off with their big-headed selves.
Yeah.
Humanity first.
Yeah.
Spaceship Earth, zooming through space. And,
That's
you know,
it.
you right now alive are the only person who has ever been you right now alive. And
Yeah, you're doing something completely original. It's never been done before.
never been done before.
You don't
Never
even
will
have to
happen
try.
ever again.
No.
This moment right now, never going to happen again.
Nope.
Yeah, up there it goes.
It's gone.
So, you know,
Cannot be replicated.
might as well do the best with what we can and hope that we do it right so future nows that just went are better than the
Yes,
ones that
that's
are
it.
now.
Yeah, if we just take care of this present as well as we can, if we are truly here and honoring this present moment, then we're going to create better memories and a better future. All we have to do is attend to this moment. No reservations, no expectations, go with the flow, and love it regardless.
Do the best
That's what
we
I got.
can. Strive
Do the best
to
you
excel.
can. It's okay that
But it's okay.
we're
if you
going to
don't.
fail. Just make sure you start trying again.
Oh,
when
you're going to fail. That's
when you
one of the
fail.
only
Yeah.
guarantees in life is that you're
That
going
is
to fail
for
and you're
sure.
going to die.
So just get back on the path, and that's
Yeah.
it. Repeatedly, over and over. That's the reps. That's the process of self-realization
Oh
and
my
enlightenment,
goodness.
to which there is no cap. Yeah, and it's late. We've been going on. This
Oh,
is our
man.
longest cast ever.
Yeah, 11:41.
Yep. 3 hours and 40-something minutes. Well, thank you guys for tuning in.
Hey, if you stuck around for the whole time, pat yourself on the back.
Yeah, for real.
I'd
And
give you
anyone that actually finishes this episode, you're going to have to listen to it in pieces to make it to the end. But I like to do that with a lot of casts. Sometimes these long conversations are just amazing, and you want to get to the end of it. And, you know, you can pause and pick it up another day. So we thank you guys for being here with us. And I'm getting tired, man. We're
Yeah,
definitely closing shop now.
I'm pumpkin mode.
Yeah, for sure. I'm 100% pumpkin mode. All right, y'all. We love you guys. We'll see y'all next time. Talk to you soon.
Meow.